Third meeting of the Harwich Conservation Commission. The first item on the agenda is a notice of intent for the Freeman property at 19 Nons Road, additions and modifications to the existing household.
Hey, Amy, is everybody signed in?
Yep. Folks, we're going to get started, so if everybody would sign in and be seated, that would be great. Thank you.
Good evening, David Little from Ryder and Wilcox.
I'm Emma Votor with Wilcox Design.
So the project before you on Nons Road consists of the construction of a chimney on the rear of the dwelling, as shown on our plan, the construction of 2 porches with an addition on the front of the building, and second-story addition, as well as installing flood vents in the basement wall. I took some photos today. I will pass out in the event that anybody didn't have an opportunity to get to the site. I'm not sure I have enough for everybody, but
Okay. Most went today. Okay. Thank you.
I've been there.
so Nons Road, as you know, it's a developed property on Allen's Creek off Nantucket Sound. It's been before you a few times over the past several years. Resource areas on the site include a dune and land subject to coastal storm flowage and the riverfront area. So we provided you with coverage calculations which note where we're increasing coverage within the 0 to 50 foot buffer and also increasing coverage in the 50 to 100 foot buffer. And I calculated it and Emma calculated it, and we are within, on all of our calculations, we're within 1 square foot of each other, so I think we're pretty accurate. We came at it from 2 sides. So the limit of work as shown on the plan will allow work to be done on the second story with ladders and things like that. It does not extend beyond the lawn in any place on the site. I provided you with a picture of the basement wall on the dune side of the dwelling so you could see where we want to lower the grade there close to 1 foot. And the reason being is because of the extent of the work that we're doing on this house, we have to make it FEMA compliant. And because we're in a flood zone, we have to install flood vents in the basement, and the flood vents are required to be within 1 foot of the cellar floor and within 1 foot of the exterior grade. So what we need to do is just in that one area on that L that sticks out towards the dune, we need to bring in 3 spots, we need to bring the grade down approximately 3 feet. So if and when the flood elevation of 11 should ever reach the dwelling, the waters would be able to go in and go out. It's a building requirement and a FEMA requirement. So there would be a little bit of excavation occurring there, and the clients, I let them know that work in the 0 to 50 foot buffer is looked at very strictly with your commission, but they would like to have a real chimney. So they would like to put in a concrete support and install a brick chimney above it. It's very small. It's only 8 square feet. If you feel that that work is too close to the resource area and it shouldn't occur, there is always the fallback of doing a gas fireplace without a real foundation. So the work that occurs on the landward side of the house, the porches would be on sonotube footings, and the addition would be on frost footings. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Emma to touch on the mitigation that we're proposing to comply with your new mitigation regulations.
All right, so we're proposing a total of 780 square feet of mitigation. in areas that are actively maintained as lawn. And the lawn will be converted to native naturalized planting areas. Those areas will be seeded with a native mix of grasses and wildflowers and planted with inkberry holly, northern bayberry, shrubby cinquefoil, fragrant sumac, and arrowwood viburnum. And the total 780 square feet of mitigation accounts for a 3-to-1 ratio of the mitigation to proposed new structure in the 0 to 50 foot buffer, and then 2-to-1 for structure proposed in the 50 to 100 foot buffer. And then these plantings are going to be abutting previous mitigation planting areas. So to give a little bit of background on that, in spring 2014, Paul Freeman had recently purchased the property, and he came to the commission with a proposal for a deck expansion, outdoor rinse station, et cetera, and a low retaining wall in the back to provide access from the rinse station to the deck. The proposed deck expansion was withdrawn, and the commission approved the grading, the outdoor rinse station, and the retaining wall. As part of that project, we proposed 168 square feet of mitigation, and that was planted just below the retaining wall. And I do have a copy of that plan if anybody would like to look over it. And then we also restored 1,700 square feet along the edge of the dune. So that 2014 plan was approved and by the Harwich Conservation Commission and implemented that summer and fall. So all of the plantings shown on the approved plans were completed as per that plan. And then, so I've also brought an overlay to share with you. Just, I believe there were some questions about how the proximity of the new mitigation areas to the other ones and if they were overlapping on the plans. And so I do have an overlay to share with you if you'd like to look at that. So I have a copy.
I'll pass it, yeah. Thank you.
And I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you.
Let's
Do you
take that
have a
back when we're
summary
done.
for us, please?
Sure. So the Freemans are requesting a variance from the 50-foot no disturb zone. The chimney would be in the 50-foot, as well as some of the addition and deck, or porch rather, on the front of the house. And for the stuff in the front of the house, it's just because of the nature of the site, the resource area is so much closer to the house. If you remember the site, there's a pretty expansive, very low dune / marsh in some areas, field, before you actually get to the creek. And just due to topography, the 50-foot is much farther landward than you would typically normally expect it. So being that those proposed structures are in the front of the house, on the other side of the house in the resource area, and in currently used area for entry or lawn, I would recommend approval of those with the mitigation. And also for the small 8 square foot chimney in the back, the corner is just lawn, Cape Cod lawn right now. If it was closer to the edge of the dune than any of the other closest pieces of the house, then I would say probably I wouldn't recommend it. We don't want any new portion to be closer to the resource. But as this is kind of tucked into a corner and it's just, you know, Cape Cod lawn right now, I don't see the harm in putting the chimney there. And again, provided that the 780 square feet of mitigation plantings are done. So with that,
Got a quick
I would
question for you,
recommend
Amy,
approval.
on your comments. Is there an existing chimney now?
no.
Okay, I thought so, okay.
I mean, the house, you could see on one of the photos, it looks like there is a chimney, but there's not like an outdoor, it's not supported exteriorly.
Okay. Well, let's see, want to start with comments from Stan?
looking at it, because the house is primarily within the 50 already, and like Amy says, that chimney is really just tucked into the corner of the house. It is within the 50, but I don't have a big problem with that, because it's really almost adding to that piece of the house. It's not really sticking out, like Amy said, further into the wetland or at all. And the porches being on the other side of the house, I don't see any impact from that, so I don't have a problem with it.
Oh, and the flood vents are a good thing to mention that, sorry.
I agree with Stan, I don't have any problem with that chimney. This land is already so altered that that little chimney doesn't make any ecological impact as far as I'm concerned. Is there an irrigation system in place right now?
I don't
I
believe so.
don't think so, no.
And you
It
do
really is
think-
Cape Cod lawn.
Yeah, if it is, it's way out front near the street, maybe for the planting
I'm
beds,
t-
but I don't think there's not in the backyard.
Not in the back. And so you're pulling up all the grass in the back that's there now and putting the grass and wildflower mix? And won't you need some kind of irrigation to keep,
We use
Those-
temporary irrigation for all of our mitigation plantings.
you use temporary, but will this lawn, this combination, grass and wildflowers, survive 3 years from now without watering?
Yes, absolutely. We use all native species that are well adapted to the dry, low nutrient conditions found on Cape Cod.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure. Dave, just so I understand, from this corner back to this corner is the area you want to lower the grade, right?
No, forgive me, it's actually from this corner to this corner, because that's already the lowest, so we only need to lower that a little less than a foot. If we were over here, we would have to do a more significant lowering, so
Okay.
it's just between those two corners that we would do that.
Okay. No, I don't see any issue with it at all.
I just have a couple questions, just following up on previous ones. So the grass and wildflower mix, where is that going here? It's going,
It's going in all of the areas that are shaded and green.
oh, so it's
So
not,
that's-
it's not in the lawn area between the green shaded and the house?
Correct. Yeah, it's only within the mitigation areas where lawn is being removed, and then we'll
Oh.
seed over that area with the grass
You're
and
seeding,
wildflower.
so you don't even expect, I mean, it looks like this is planted rather densely with shrubs. So the grass and wildflower mix
Yeah,
won't dominate, or will they choke out the shrubs? I'm not sure how that works.
We use a low grass and wildflower mix, so it just creates a really nice, dense ground cover layer. And then the shrubs, as they're establishing, that ground cover layer will become established. It has a really great deep root system, so that water infiltration happens more readily, and it mitigates stormwater in a better way. So, and then they won't outcompete each other.
Okay, then the rest of the lawn, I mean, I just walked around there, and to me, I don't know about it. I'm not sure I would have called that a Cape Cod lawn, because I don't recall seeing any weeds whatsoever in the lawn.
I just
So,
mean not maintained necessarily.
yeah, but the lack of weeds implies that there have been herbicides on there, so, I think probably we would want to condition
Yep.
no
And
herbicides.
I have added, under the construction notes, number one, I have no herbicides to be used on the subject lot. I have included that. And
Okay.
we're happy to have any condition relative to that. And what we're really hoping to accomplish is just so we have enough room to walk around
Sure.
that side of the dwelling to do normal maintenance on the house. We're trying to minimize it as much as we can.
I can also share, as per your other question, I can also share photographs with you of the site. I have photos of both the mitigation areas and that lawn, and also our restoration area, so that you can see how the grasses and wildflowers intermix with the shrubs.
So you did the identical thing you're saying in the previous
Yes, in the
mitigation.
previous mitigation
I,
area.
okay.
I'll keep it for the record, sure. Thank you. Anybody else wanna? So the lawn area essentially is just getting narrowed up in the back of the house.
Okay.
I'll take those in the plan back after.
I don't have any.
This was the overlay plan?
That's the overlay.
So,
Any further
can't really see
thoughts on
anything
that,
different on it.
John?
No.
Any further comments?
No further comments.
So I got a couple on, the plan that shows the overlay, the previous mitigation's not that easy to interpret. Do you have another image or
I
that
have
shows?
the previous plan, that might help.
Yep, and maybe the photographs too will help. Sure.
You can give it right to Brad, that's fine.
I just want to try to relate.
And so the concrete wall, I believe, was located after, it's an as-built, so they don't line up exactly, but the planting areas are directly abutting one another.
So with the previous restoration, was there more planting a little bit along the wall?
It was all planted east of the wall, so on the lower side of the wall.
So this time we're coming west of the wall, south and west?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And those plants did fairly well?
Yes.
Okay, and then I guess a question for Amy. Let me pass these along so you can see them. So some of these native shrubs are not familiar to me. Are they tend to be more ornamental, or are they nice native bushes that'll do well there and fit in with
They are
plants that
natives.
should be there?
They will. We're actually Nikki and myself have been redoing our native list to be more comprehensive.
Mhm.
And I think all of the ones that you mentioned are on that list, and they are more of a drought-tolerant species. I mean, your typical bayberry, like she said, but then your fragrant sumac and the single foil as well will be nice.
And actually, they're consistent with what we've already used in the restoration and mitigation areas, so we really want to create a consistent, naturalized area there.
It's like the sumac is really good for wildlife. Birds really, use that a lot, so.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one that I'm not familiar with, and the shrubby cinquefoil.
Mhm.
But, okay. So we're looking to have a condition of no herbicides, pesticides, or fertilizers in the backyard.
And I would reiterate too, the no irrigation, which aside from the temporary irrigation to establish the planting.
Amy at some
It
point.
is in our other permits, but it's just good to have it continuous in all of our permits for the property.
And we issued a certificate of compliance for the previous order, didn't we?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't,
If we didn't, I'll certainly follow through on that, Brad.
I'll check.
Yep.
It would make sense, everything's done, so.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we can entertain a motion.
I'll propose a motion to approve the changes and plantings at 19 Nons Road, Christine Freeman.
Second.
Wait a second.
In additions,
And the site plan as well with the proposed additions.
The site plan with the proposed additions, absolutely.
So we have a seconded, we have a condition of no fertilizer, pesticides, or herbicides, or irrigation in the backyard. Any other conditions that we should be putting in?
no, I think those are the most important ones.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, not opposed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I have those plans and photos? Well, I'll just put them right in here. Oh, here, just pass them, Dan.
And we did get a file number.
Yes, we did.
They're getting a little,
I'll take
they're
extra.
getting,
Well, I'll
you
just
notice they're
mark.
getting quicker?
That's getting quicker. Thanks. That wasn't a dig on anybody, that was natural heritage I was alluding to. Not getting quicker. While we have a second, if anybody hasn't signed in the back of the room, please do so. There are also agendas back there, especially if you want to speak. It just helps us get the names right in the minutes. Thank you.
Okay, next we have a notice of intent for the county property at 6 Saquatucket Point. It's a proposal to dredge and beach nourishment.
Green coats? Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Do you have green coats? If not, you can get them to me. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Perfect. Thank you. Forgot to ask the last one.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Charlie Agro. I'm from Coastal Engineering. I'm here to represent Mr. Carney. The proposed project is to perform maintenance dredging at the sites as shown on the plan. Maintenance dredging has been permitted at this site before, and the last time it was dredged was in January 2010. We're looking to perform the project the same way it has been done previously. We'll need to get a new Chapter 91 license and an Army Corps permit. So as far as the timeline goes, we're looking for sometime maybe next season or the season afterwards. The time of year restriction was mentioned by the Division of Marine Fisheries letter, and I believe it is for winter flounder, which is between January 15th through June 30th. So the ideal time frame for dredging will, and then I'm sure Natural Heritage will weigh in for the beach nourishment side, and it's probably gonna say we can't put sand down till September 1st, so the dredging time window is probably gonna be between September 1st and January 15th. The dredge depth is -6 feet mean low water. To dredge the site right now, we're looking at approximately 1,500 cubic yards of dredging. The dredge sediment will be used as beach nourishment, which will be placed on the seaward edge of the property, as shown on the plan. Ideally, we'd be able to schedule with the county dredge, so that next time they dredge Saquatucket Harbor, we'll be able to piggyback with them and have them dredge the proposed areas as shown on the plans. And the county dredge will be able to dig and pump the sand simultaneously from the dredge sites to the beach. If the county dredge isn't available, or if we can't coordinate with them, we'd like to have the ability to use a third-party contractor to use a bucket dredge to come in and excavate the dredge area and place the sand in the dewatering areas, as shown on the plan. The wetland resource areas on this site are land under the ocean, coastal beaches, coastal dune, salt marsh, and land containing shellfish. Land under the ocean will be enhanced due to the increased water circulation from increased water depth. Also, by increasing the water depth, will increase the distance between the propeller of Mr. Carney's boat or any other boat in the area to the seafloor, which will decrease any effects of turbidity or prop wash in the area. The coastal beach will be enhanced with the addition of a new sediment from the dredge site. We've done grain size analysis of the sediment in the dredge site and on the beach, and we found the sediment within the dredge area to be compatible with the sand on the beach. Adding more sand to the beach will also counteract effects from erosion and also benefit downdrift beaches from erosion from storms. And the coastal dune will also be enhanced, as shown on the plan. The coastal dune has experienced a pretty significant amount of erosion from when it was previously surveyed in 2009 to now, 2018. And the project will reconstruct the dune and make it more suitable and make it more substantial to withstand erosion from storms. The salt marsh that exists on the other side of the bulkhead will be protected by the bulkhead within the private boat slip here. We will also recommend using a silt boom to block the area outside of the dredge sites to prevent any suspended sediments from the dredging project to flow into the salt marsh. Any suspended sediments that happen as a result of dredging will be temporary. There'll be no long-term suspension of sediment. We'll also recommend that the dredging be done during the outgoing tide so that the current is flowing in the outward direction. So if any suspended sediment does get outside of the dredge site, it'll be flowing away from the existing salt marsh. And there's also land containing shellfish, and as stated in the Division of Marine Fisheries letter here, there is a quahog area, and the site does fall within a quahog site, and there'll be some coordination with the Shellfish Constable as to, and Amy as well, for an approach. During the waterways meeting, we were also informed that there is a shellfish bed on the seaward side of the beach, somewhere in this general area here, and to avoid, if we did use the county dredge, if the county dredge was available, to avoid any sediment from the dredge getting flowing into and covering the shellfish bed there, as a dike would be constructed to contain the slurry above the mean high water line, and all the nourishment will be placed and contained above the mean high water line. So again, we're looking to re-permit this project that's been previously permitted and was last done in January 2009, and we are planning to do the project exactly how it was done before, so there shouldn't be any long-term or adverse effects to the wetlands resources area.
Thank you. Amy?
When you say construction of, or implementation of a dike, above the mean high water line to control the slurry, what would that be composed of?
So that would just be of the sand that's existing there, excavating the sand back a little bit to
Gotcha.
create a barrier so that it contains the
So something
native sand.
natural?
Absolutely.
You're not bringing something in?
No, not
Okay.
bringing in hay bales
Good.
or anything like that.
Okay,
Yep.
good. And just to remind the commission, it has to be above mean high water anyways, because that is what the town-wide nourishment permit, which can include private properties, stipulates there cannot be nourishment below the mean high water line. So that works. We do not yet have the letter from Natural Heritage, which is what I anticipate with the plover conditions. No work on the beach between probably April 1st and September 1st. But we can't close the hearing until we do get that letter.
Right.
But we can ask and as many questions as, or try to get clarification if we need to beforehand. Again, they do have the Division of Marine Fisheries recommendation that no dredging occur between January 15th and June 30th. So ideally, this would probably happen next year this time. Let me think. I was curious about your dewatering areas. I thought that would be kind of a, well, if the county dredge and piping didn't work, that's what you would want to do, because I'm sure the owners don't want to have to use that lawn area if they don't have to,
Right.
for dredge spoils. The other thing I'd be concerned, I mean, it would ruin the vegetation that is there, and hopefully not, but depending on the amount of water, you don't want a lot of water behind the bulkhead either.
Right,
So-
so the vegetation that's here and here is just lawn,
Right,
and we would construct a containment
right.
basin that's shown here to, try to keep everything as consolidated as possible, but I
Still
guess.
everything would drain.
Yeah, so if, I guess after, if it was done this way, which he does want to use a county dredge because it would be, I guess, more efficient, probably more cost effective.
Very much.
And if the project was completed in this order, we would meet beforehand, inspect the site, and then make sure after construction is done, any damage, any vegetation would be corrected.
There is a little portion of salt marsh on your north side there, but it is behind the bulkhead, so I'm not concerned about damage to salt marsh as a result of dredging there, because especially if it's done on an outgoing tide, you shouldn't see any siltation into the marsh, and you won't see any slumping of the marsh due to that bulkhead. The majority of the dredging, if you go out to the site, you can see very clearly a sandbar that's developed
Yeah.
adjacent to the longest part of the bulkhead here. And that's the major issue. The sand kind of comes around, sand travels west to east, so the sand comes around the other jetty, gets trapped in between the two and settles here. The town dredges, so the Carneys own this shorefront, but the town has the channel right adjacent to it, and we dredge that almost annually. So it's right adjacent to a dredge area that gets done annually. And this has been dredged before. I think using that compatible sand for beach nourishment is a good thing, because this jetty that you're just on the other side of is the side that gets starved of sand. The sand builds up on the Winchmere Pines Association beach, And this area sees unnaturally high erosion because the sand doesn't take a hard right angle and settle. So this area has experienced some erosion and could stand for some building up. And I would even suggest, depending on how much we have there and how stable it is, that you may want, in the winter season of next year, potentially to try to plant it with some beach grass to hold some more of it. Just recommend, if you do permit this, that the shellfish be removed ahead of time at the direction of the Natural Resource Director. And I don't think I have any more comments, so we're just waiting on natural heritage for me.
Thanks, Amy. Any comments? Commissioners, Stan, do you, any comments?
I saw the area, I mean, to me, it's really part of the, right next to the channel, and if we don't have that dredged, it can impact the channel to the harbor. So and the fact that it had been dredged previously, and the previous permit didn't have the maintenance wording underneath it, I think it's just a technicality that it wasn't done that way, or where it is now on subsequent permits. So it seems thing we should do.
Do you mean our previous permit or someone else's permit?
Our previous permit didn't, well, we're gonna be looking at it for a certificate of compliance later. It expired, but it didn't have language for maintaining in it, so they didn't have the ability to do that.
So it lapsed in effect.
Like, whereas all of our town permits, I mean, we have maintenance permits for dredging.
Right.
So long as things don't change, if footprints change of dredging, you have to come back to the town and also, obviously, Chapter 91. And
Do you expect the Army Corps will consider it to be maintenance?
Yes, so the Army Corps permits that we previously had expired, I think, back in 2016. So we're gonna have to reapply with Chapter 91, 401 water quality, and the Army Corps as well.
Yep.
I guess just the one question, and from the property line, so the property is in the channel itself, where the sand is building up, that part of the channel is within the,
I can't say definitively, but
I mean, that's why we're dredging it. I mean, they said that's their area of responsibility to
Yes.
dredge. So I was just more of a curiosity standpoint.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure if that is all their property or if that's just their area of concern. I'm not really too sure about that, what the ownership is out there.
it's a federal channel.
Yeah.
Right, that's why I was trying to
It
understand,
is a
why are they responsible for the dredging if the town's dredging that?
The town is responsible for,
Well, this is the limit of the
May-
federal channel
the
here.
the limit of the
Federal
federal
channel
channel
stops here.
is there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, just,
I'd expect it's land underwater, so I would not expect it to be the property owner's land.
right.
But it's also not really the town's potentially either.
Right.
I mean, well, it is town, because anything within 3 miles is technically town.
So you're saying the channel was
Not
regulated by the federal government, and it wouldn't require them to go to the
To the bulkhead.
width? Okay, that's what I was, my curiosity is.
For a follow-up question, I'd ask the same thing, and why is it coming out so far where there is no navigation concerns for the property owner, seaward? It makes a lot of sense to dredge where the boat is,
Right.
but further seaward, is there a reason why the dredge footprint's so large?
Yep, so this area here is the area that Amy was just talking about, that the sediment builds up. And this limit of the dredge area was designed based on where the federal channel footprint is. And you can kind of see, looking at the contours on the plan, just on the outside of this line here, the contour is about 7 or 8 feet or so, and it's very consistent. That's because the channel was just dredged, I guess, this past season with the large project that went on out there. And we did the survey back July 20th, I believe, and it shows when you're out there, there's a pretty big shoal that I wasn't there before this. I mean, I've driven by there a bunch, but this shoal, I guess, is growing at a pretty significant rate there on the other side.
It becomes a navigational issue potentially too for some of the bigger boats coming out of Saquatucket.
It gets a little thin. There's that green buoy over here and the red over
Right,
here.
yeah.
even doing the survey, we're, you know, kind of getting a little tight.
Right. I was just, like I said, it was more of a curiosity, because the channel is fairly narrow there at that point to begin with, so, from my perspective, even
Right.
though I'm not a boater, it would be helpful to the whole harbor itself to have that dredged.
No comments from Carolyn.
You have not talked to the natural resource director, though? Not yet.
I haven't personally talked to him, no.
I
Have,
went to Waterways.
We were at Waterways
went
and
to Waterways.
He's
we
here.
went through there.
Here tonight?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Natural Resources Director.
Good evening, Heinz Prof, Natural Resources Director. I also attend the Waterways Committee meetings when I can. You were there.
Yeah, I did
I've
talk,
listened
yeah.
to this. I provided comments. He explained and summarized quite well the points that I brought up, primarily the outside shellfishing area that could be affected if there wasn't a boom set. In that case, there's natural seed there. I plant cohogs there. It's an open shellfishing area throughout the year. So that was a protective resource that I wanted to be addressed, and it was based upon his response, and everything else that he mentioned I concur with. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's good. I will say that I have had discussions previous to seeing this on the width of that channel, and when the Freedom Ferry or the Captain Kidd or whoever it was coming out, and then there was a 40-foot, 45-foot boat coming out at the same time, the owner of the 45-foot boat felt that the channel was so narrow, he could not stay in it, and he had to run his boat aground in order to avoid being too small in the channel. So I think this is a necessary benefit to the town.
Mark?
I agree. I think it's very compelling to go forward with.
So I have a question about the dewatering sites. When I
Yep.
went on there, the one next to the boat slip,
Yes.
it was yesterday afternoon, before it poured rain overnight, and it was extremely soggy there. And I'm just wondering how that works. There must be a drainage problem there, so how does that work for dewatering sand?
Right. So what we would do is lay down a impervious liner, as shown in this detail here, and a jersey barrier and the liner would go over the top. The dredge would, this is kind of a convenient area, and this is the same area on the previous plan. This is a new one that I included for this site here. So the dredge would be able to dig and place material over here, and you would, I believe, have, I've seen it before where you have some kind of pipe coming out of the area to allow.
Charlie, you gotta take the mic with you if
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
I'm getting a clue over there.
Yeah, so it shows on the detail.
Thank you.
It's very
I see.
vague. There's a 2-inch sump pipe coming out from underneath it.
You're not
so-
depending on the water draining through.
Right, not leaching through the ground. It would
I
go
didn't look-
into that.
I see that on there.
No, it's a good point, because it's hard for me to tell, and I put it on there, so that's a good point.
And just a comment, again, looking at that lawn, it looks highly manicured, probably full of great nutrients for lawns, and herbicides, and probably insecticides there, which is not a good thing. I don't know what we can do about it here, but I suspect, looking at all those houses along there, they're all doing that, which is not a great thing. Dumping nutrients into Saquotucket Harbor, some of it gets into Witchmere, which is not a good thing, and some of it into Nantucket Sound.
You can urge him to pass that message on to the property owner, otherwise.
Yeah, I can bring that up to Mr. Carney. and-
Right.
If there was
Just-
work being proposed to the house, then it would be
If
easier
they
for
use
us to
those
condition,
dewatering
but because it's the dredge,
Altering
little different.
the
I
lawn
get it.
within
So
the-
otherwise,
I-
looks fine to me.
Question, we could discuss it. Carolyn's wondering if we can't raise that issue. My feeling is there really isn't a proposed to change the lawn.
There's no proposed change to the house or the upland area.
And
So I think it would be a real stretch.
Yeah, it's a
The-
site that's been
Well,
there
the
for a long time.
dewatering, potentially.
That was my question. If they have to use those dewatering sites, and your preference would be to,
Use the county dredge in this time,
and,
Saquatucket's on their schedule.
and your preference would be to deposit the sand on the beach.
Yep.
But if they have to use that dewatering site, then they are working within the 0 to 50.
And what happens to the grass after you have an impervious barrier over it for some extended period of time? It needs to get replanted properly.
Right,
So
it's
that's
probably
working
not good
0
for
to
it.
50, which would require, again, talking to us, right?
Yeah, I think maybe if that is the case, maybe you come back to the commission for like an update.
Yeah, and we can
This will
even,
be open. If we have to do it that way,
mhm.
the dewatering, maybe we can address it.
So we approve it for depositing the sand on the beach, and if they cannot do that, they have to come back to us for the dewatering approval?
Well, even just to be clear, if we use the dewatering sites, after the sediment is dewatered, it will be then trucked over or brought to the beach using maybe a front-end loader. The shell driveway and the layout of it's kind of, what's it called? It makes it easy and convenient for a front-end loader to
Drive down.
pick up the sand from the dewatering site and then bring it over to the beach from the existing path that's there. So the sand, either way, will be getting deposited on the beach. And again, ideally, it's a much easier one-step process if the county dredge can do it, and if Saquatucket is dredged somewhat frequently, annually or biannually, like you guys said, hopefully we'll be able to just, ask them to dig the full width, the federal channel as well as this area as well. And if the permits are in place, we won't have to worry about it.
No, there's no way we can touch nutrients in the lawn.
I don't know the answer to that tonight. It's a little hairy.
Can you have a special condition that encourages a change in management?
Yeah, and
don't feel we
I
can
could,
regulate.
I can also put a cover letter to that effect too.
I think to regulate for this proposal, it would not be
Right.
appropriate.
It would be difficult.
But it just seems to me,
So my question about that is, if reseeding is required because dewatering happens on the lawn, then wouldn't that require coming back here? Because that would be work in 0 to 50?
Well, they're kind of asking, it's kind of here right now. They're saying, well, if we dewater here, I mean, what will happen is they have to reseed, so it's kind of here now.
Well, I guess my question goes back to is we can't approve this tonight because of the other
Natural heritage, yeah.
heritage. So where are we going with this at this point, I guess?
I mean, I can ask the question quickly of council about, the level of what our abilities are in regards to the upland piece, that's fine. And have
Well, I
that
would not like to see them reseed with all kinds of fertilizers.
yeah, it's tough. Our approach has been that that's a grandfathered management practice
Yeah.
in this situation.
I'm happy to look into it a little bit further between now and the next meeting, because, again, we have to continue for heritage, so.
Okay.
I love the idea of encouraging him to
Mhm.
do what he can to reduce the loading
Mhm.
on that lawn. It's a very high-profile lawn, and absolutely, Saquatucket Harbor just blooms up in recent years, every spring.
More native plantings, too, I would always encourage that, so. Okay,
Okay, so we're not gonna close or vote on it.
yeah, it would be a continuance
Okay.
to the 17th.
I have one question that might not be that related, but there's, in your plan, you've got 3 piers adjacent to that inland area. And this site was before us not long ago,
Yes.
where we determined that it was not permitted to have 3 floats, actually, not piers, floats. And one was, we asked to remove one. So are there in fact?
I thought that there were 3, but they couldn't, I'd have to check. I thought that there were 3 allowed, but not as big as what was out there before. I'd have to
I thought
look.
we asked to have one removed, so I would just.
I can check on
I would
that.
ask to check on the status.
Sure.
And if I'm remembering correctly, modify the plan
I
to
remember that.
remove that 3rd appear.
And if that's the case, if there was one that was requested to be removed, we can instruct Mr. Carney there to remove that float, and
Yeah.
we can update that on the plan
I
as
know
well.
they did last year. I remember there being less last year. I didn't notice it today, to be honest. I wasn't looking at that.
There are 3 floats. I don't know what their size is necessarily.
They're pretty uniform,
I think
so
they're 6 by 14, I believe, 6 by
Let me-
12 feet or
Yeah.
so.
let me look. It came up about a year or two ago.
Okay. And yeah, if you just let me know and
Yep.
make a quick change.
Okay, I thought that was the outcome. Okay, any other questions? Any questions from the audience? I move that we continue until, when would you like to continue? To the next hearing? Or-
I think the next hearing, I mean,
17th, yeah.
the 17th, I think we should have the natural heritage letter by then, but if not, should we let you know and just continue it
Yeah.
then to the next one?
Okay,
Yeah, so
I
that'll
move we
work.
continue to October 17th.
I second it.
Second it, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right,
Motion
thank you.
carries. Thank you. Okay, next we have a continuance of a notice of intent for the Turner property at 18 Strandway. It's proposed steps, dock, and dredging.
All set?
Yep.
Okay. For the record, I'm Mark Burgess of Shorefront Consulting, representing the Turners. With me tonight is Pamela Newberg, which the board is familiar with quite well. Glenn Wood is in the audience, and also the Turners are in the audience. As you know, Heinz is here as well. So what I want to do is basically a brief recap of how we got to this point, and then go through some points, the elements of the design, the latest revision, and a couple of other points and some suggestions. I'll be as brief as possible. I might talk a little fast, so if you don't, if you need to stop me, go ahead and stop me. So we started permitting back in March, and we've been plagued with some delays and quorums issues and all kinds of, just about, if it could happen to this project, it did. We started in March. We started out with the proposal here, in the middle of the property. The proposal had less than 100 cubic yards of dredging, and the float was tucked in as close as possible to the shore to that end. We went to Waterways. Waterways was fine with it, with the dredging and any of the shellfish issue and the location of the project, everything, they were fine with it. We came to Conservation. Conservation was not so fine with it. So we were asked to see if we could remove the dredging from the project, whether remove the dock or remove the dredging. We went back to Waterways to ask if we could push the float out. Waterways said no. So then we went back to the drawing board, and we found that there was more water closer into shore over here to the southeast in a general bowl area. So we started with the float out here at the blue. We came to Conservation first, and Waterways was not in favor of it at that point. And I think you guys are still waiting for the letter, too. So then for whatever sequence of events that occurred, that was around June. So then we revised the design to move the float back 5 feet, and I'll get to how we did that in a minute. That was in July or August. I wasn't available in August, so we didn't go to waterways until September 19th. So the latest proposal, this is a summary plan. So the plan that you have before you is the one that Waterways signed, and we received unanimous approval from Waterways for this latest design on September 19th, hence why we're in front of you tonight. Just to give you a lay of the land, I'm going to flip this over. Just briefly, here's the whole waterway, and here's the dock right here of where it's proposed in the general scheme of things. So, can everybody see that okay? Flip it back over, I guess. So this revision, the letter explains it pretty well. We were able to move the float 5 feet landward because we narrowed the float from 8 feet to 6 feet. I don't recommend going any narrower than 6 feet, or it just gets too tippy. And then we were able to move it. We started with 3 feet of clearance on all sides of the float. That exceeded the guideline requirements, so we moved it landward another 3 feet so that we have 2.5 feet on all sides on the landward side of the float and 3.7 on the seaward end. So that meets the minimum requirements as set forth in all of the guidelines and bylaws and Division of Marine Fisheries suggestions and all of that. So that's how we were able to move the seaward edge of the float 5 feet landward. That is staked out on the site. It's been there for 2 weeks or since the 19th, before the 19th. So if anybody had a chance to view the site, that white PVC represents the center line of the seaward edge of the float. Also, the dock was redesigned to a monopile design. Now, I don't think the board, you might be familiar with it just because the concept is simply, well, it's one pile in the middle. I'm not sure, do any monopiles exist, any monopile docks exist in Harwich?
One or two.
Okay,
I had one in my time.
all right, so not unfamiliar, but
So
not.
Brad was probably the only one. I don't even remember where it is, but I know we have one.
I don't think
I've
I've
never
seen one,
but-
yeah.
Okay. So the monopile design cuts the number of piles in half, and we would normally use 2 10-inch piles. We're only using one 12-inch pile. In addition, the piles are fiberglass. Now, I know the board is familiar with the Pearson piles, and that's what we intend to use. So they're 12-inch diameter Pearson piles. They're completely inert. They don't leach anything. And you put them in once, they're easier to drive. You don't need as big of equipment. I sent this design to Pearson, and they signed off on it with the spans and the supports and everything, so we have their blessing for this design. And to further address Division of Marine Fisheries comments, we made the whole dock with grading. We don't have to do that, but we're offering that. It does meet the 1-to-1 ratio. It's 5 feet above the marsh at mean high water. And the other part of the design was to remove the stairs and any structure from over or in the marsh. So that the only way to get to the beach will be stairs in the revetment, which was approved separately under the House filing. So there's no structures beyond the base of the revetment that are that are on the ground. The piles span the marsh completely, and the second set of piles span from the edge of the marsh to 14 feet beyond mean low water. So they span the entire coastal beach as well. So the elements of the design, I just went through a couple of those. So in the Shellfish Study, which is at the top one here, so remember there were actually been 3 shellfish surveys for this site. The first one, the first one was what we did over here for the first iteration. Then we did another one here for the second iteration. And then Dr. Newberg did her study down the center line and one on each side. So it's a duplicate of this data. And that survey was done to correlate our data. And Pam can explain that when we get to that part of the presentation. The only place where shellfish are found here is, there is 2 plots that were found under the dock, but the piles span all of this. They span this narrow band of shellfish that you see that are along the shoreline in this area. So there's no pile plunked right in the middle of all of this. There's no shellfish beyond the outer pile, and the inner pile is right at the edge of the marsh. And then there's nothing beyond mean low water. It's all scientific term of poop. Okay, it's just really the soft anoxic stinky mud. There's nothing there. Nothing will ever be there. The ramp, the float, and the decking are all seasonally removed. And as I said, this design, especially being the monopile design, it exceeds all of the requirements, regulations, guidelines, everything that we have available to us to design docks against any, to prevent negative impacts to resource areas. This design exceeds that in every aspect, in clearance, in the number of piles, in the span of piles, all of that. Just for comparison, I looked at a Google Earth aerial in the summer, I think around 2014, I think it was, and I counted the number of docks in the river, just because I figured somebody might ask that question. There are 9 docks, well, there's 7 docks and 2 bulkheads, which are areas that are able to dock docks south of the bridge in this area, in this embayment. From the Shellfish Shack, the town Shellfish Shack, up to the bridge, there's 9 such structures. North of the Lower County Bridge to the Route 28 bridge, there's another 27 docks. So there's a total of 36 docks that I counted from the aerial, unless any new ones were added from 2014, in this stretch of the river, from Route 28 to the mouth of the river. So then I said, well, I remember a project, I know Brad remembers it. It was 19 Nons Way, and it was a dock that went through. And because we've removed the dredging from this project, I felt that we were very close in comparison to this project. So I compared them. What I found was that the pilings for the 19 Nons Road project, those pilings also spanned a marsh, and the second set of pilings spanned the beach a little bit beyond mean low water also, but they spanned the entire beach and went beyond mean low water, just like this dock does. So we, like I said, we span the marsh, we span the entire beach, and 14 feet beyond mean low water, there's not a pile to be had in sight. It's clear underneath with plenty of clearance. At mean high water, it starts out with 4.7 and gets up to almost 7 feet at the below mean low water. So any area where anybody would want to shellfish, there's plenty of room to do so. The so both projects are pretty much exactly similar that way in their spans across these resource areas instead of putting structures in the resource areas. The float for the 19 Nons Road was an 8 by 20, which was 160 square feet. Our float has been reduced now to 6 by 25, which is 150 square feet, so it's a smaller float. And then I said, well, this is all about the shellfish, so let me go see where the shellfish were found for that project. Now, if the people that remember the project know that there were only 7 shellfish found in the area, and we think it's because the channel was dredged. At any rate, this is the, I'll bring this back over with me. This is the Shellfish Survey that Pamela Newberg did back for that project in 2016, I think it was. So these are the 7 areas where shellfish were found. One of them is right under the dock, in between the 2 pilings where this is the storage bench, and then this is the edge of the marsh. So there's a piling here and a piling here, and there's one plot of shellfish in the middle, pretty much like what we have for this site. There were shellfish located seaward of the float, and we don't have that here. We have nothing beyond mean low water. There's nothing. So that was my comparison for what was out there, because I just thought that question might come up. What I did was in the section plans, the elevations, and I can show these to you, but the 19 Nons Way, here's the span, here's the edge of the marsh, that's where the shellfish was found, right in the middle, just landward of the bend. In our case, same thing. Landward of the end of the dock, and in between the pilings, we had 2 plots that have shellfish there, where we're spanning over. So again, I felt that was pretty similar and worthy to point out. Okay. Alternatives. We had discussed that if there's no dock at the site, it's actually, in our opinion, more of a detriment to the site, because if somebody has a boat and they want to pull it up on the beach, then they're going to pull it up on the beach, walk on the beach, trample that portion of it, trample the salt marsh, and you know how all that goes. So that was an undesirable outcome. So the advantage of having the dock, of course, is to reduce the impacts to the resource areas and gain access to the water without impacting the resource areas. There was a question from another board regarding how much the association dock, or the courtesy dock, is available for use by the applicant. I went down there, I mean, it's one small dock for all of the association members. I went down there one day and I counted all of the dinghies and kayaks and everything on the racks. There was 43 boats down there. So my point there is simply that that association dock is well used, and there's not a lot of opportunity for anybody else to use it. So we removed the dredging from the project. That was one alternative that we looked at, that we were successful. We raised it up. We had the design changes. We've looked at alternate designs, alternate locations, and I really feel that you know, all these iterations of how we get to this point, we've really tried to address as much as humanly possible, you know, a design that meets all of the performance standards and addresses all of the potential for impacts. The performance standard, as you know, is significant negative impacts. I don't know what defines significant. It's not written anywhere, but they say significant negative impacts. Potentially, there's temporary impacts from construction. In this case, because of the monopile and because they take so much less energy to drive, I think that's even less. So significant, obviously we don't feel that there's significant impacts here. And we've all agreed that there's more shellfish here. The regulations also don't define what a significant shellfish habitat would be. Certainly there's more here, but the regulations don't define it. Other towns have mapped shellfish areas that are graded to their importance, and the mitigation for docks in those areas accompanies that level of importance. Barnstable does that, and I think Falmouth does that as well. But they place a value on their shellfish areas. It just makes it easier for those definitions. Okay, so just some points to consider. So we've been to waterways 4 times. This is our 3rd time here. The project was withdrawn and refiled because of some quorum issues that the board had. We certainly appreciate the board's cooperation during that time. It was kind of a tough time for everybody. There was a prior 1932 dock license on this property. I don't know if you recall, this property was one large property from the bridge all the way to the ocean back in the 20s. The house was built in the 20s, but there is a dock license that myself and the civil engineer were able to overlay onto the plans, and it did reside on this property, right in the corner, probably right around here. I now feel that because of the dredging and the arrangement and the shorter length of the dock, that it's very similar to many of the other docks in Harwich, and of course most of them that are in the Herring River already. We got unanimous approval from Waterways. We have a letter from your Natural Resources Director to support the project. We've substantiated and validated the Shellfish report. Pam Newberg has done that. And we were asked to provide case law examples for projects in shellfish areas, and Mr. Wood has submitted those documents to you for your review. And further, the dock meets all the regulations at the state and the federal levels. Amy and I have talked about this is my last point. Amy and I have talked about some special conditions to consider for approval of this project. Division of Marine Fisheries asked for a time of year construction limitation, that no construction would be performed between January 15th and June 30th. Certainly, that's not a problem, that we would comply with that. Division of Marine Fisheries requested 30 inches under all sides of the float. We meet that. We did that. And shading impacts, they said that although the dock is a 1-to-1 ratio, they'd like to see more, so that's why we added grading to the entire dock. Monitoring. So here's something that we want to do to set this project apart from, I think, any other project that's probably been before you for a new dock. So we understand the significance of shellfish. Although we don't think that the project will have any significant negative impacts on a long or short-term basis, what we're proposing to be in a special condition would be some form of monitoring. So I'm just posing this out here. You guys can certainly open for discussion. What we would consider was that after well, I'll back up. Whether the shellfish are removed prior to construction or not, I think is up for discussion. There's only one pile, and it doesn't span any of that area. So I see no harm in leaving them there. Heinz suggested that they be removed. I think that's up for discussion, and we certainly can go either way on that. So 1 year, what I'm proposing is, let's just say 1 year after the construction is completed, we do another shellfish survey. I don't think anybody's done this before. So you do another shellfish survey, and you see what's there. Now, obviously, between then and between that year, the area shouldn't be shellfished, commercially. There's only three commercial shellfish permits in the town anyway. But that area should be left to naturalize on its own without the ability for anybody to shellfish, whether we put up signs or whatever, because that wouldn't be fair. So a year later, we go back and see what's there, and we compare it to the data that we already have. I'm assuming it won't be vastly different. But if it is, then we would offer on-site mitigation. And I've done this in other towns years ago, but you provide a netting that you attach to the soil to prevent the juveniles from getting predated. And you cast the juveniles onto the sand, or onto the beach in the area that you need to. You put the netting over them, and you let them grow forth and multiply. So the idea was, rather than, or in addition to the mitigation that's proposed, which is the standard 30 bushels a year for 3 years, I'm saying let's monitor the site, make sure that it goes back, if it even degrades at all, that it goes back to where it's supposed to be. Monitor it a year later and augment it if you need to with on-site mitigation, followed up with perhaps another survey, just to ensure that everything's back to where it's supposed to be. We're offering that, and okay, so the last thing, I know that you struggle with the bylaw, and that's why we're asking for the variance. It's the only thing that we're asking for is this variance. The variance, of course, can be granted if there's no other reasonable alternatives, which I think I've pointed out that we've gone through the ringer trying to find alternatives. The on-site mitigation is important because it addresses any potential for any negative impacts on the site. The town gets the money to put it to mitigate anywhere else they want, and as we said, that mitigation seeds over an acre. So to seed in just this area wouldn't be a huge deal, and we certainly offer it. If you worry about setting a precedent, I've said this to many boards, you have to look at the fact that every project is based on its own merits. I think we're the only ones before you that have ever offered mitigation. I think we're probably the only ones before you recently that offered a monopile design and full grading and large pile spans. What I'm suggesting is if we set a precedent, this should be it. This should be the design and the mitigation and the project approach that would get approved for situations like this. And nothing, and I'm not being a snob, I'm saying accept nothing less, because we've done the work. So with that, Pam, if you have anything to say.
I have
a few things I would like to add, certainly if, with the time being, understanding the time. But I was brought in to review the plan. I wasn't part of the initial project. The initial plans where it was, you know, a little bit to the north. But at the end of this project's life here, I hope that as we move towards permitting, I was asked to review the project itself and to review the shellfish habitat and to make a determination. By the way, for the record, my name is Pamela Newberg. I have a PhD in marine biology. I've been doing shellfish surveys here on Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket for the last 20 years. I'm a shellfish, I consider myself, I'm a benthic ecologist and a shellfish biologist. So to put that out there for you, I know many of you from over the years of my work here in Harwich and elsewhere. So I looked at the plan, and I have to say that the way that the plan has been redesigned, the project has been redesigned with no pilings in the shellfish area. It's very high with the grading, and there's enough water, so the performance standards are met. There's enough water for the vessel at the end of the dock. There's plenty of height above the salt marsh to protect the salt marsh and allow light to come in. So the salt marsh grass and the pilings are monopiles, and they span over the narrow bridge of the area where we found the shellfish. And so there'd be no direct impact to the shellfish habitat. So I have to say that this has been the evolution of this project is appreciated and has certainly taken into consideration the environment and ecology to protect shellfish and salt marsh habitat. I also like to add with respect to the monitoring and the 310 CMR, Massachusetts Code of Regulations in the Wetlands Code 1034, it does state in Section 4 that projects which temporarily have an adverse effect on shellfish productivity but which do not permanently destroy the habitat may be permitted if the land containing shellfish can and will be returned substantially to its former productivity in 1 year or less. So I think that your monitoring fits well with the Code of Massachusetts, and if we come back and see that there's shellfish that are equivalent to what there were before, then that would be wonderful. But if they're not, the client is on board to actively provide mitigation, and I think that that would suffice to help with the shellfish in the area. So I have to say I support the project. So thank you.
Thank you. Amy, do you have a summary for us?
Did you want to hear from me or Heights first?
You can wait. Ladies first.
Whoever's ready. Heinz?
Go ahead,
Go
Heinz.
ahead.
Heinz Proft again, Natural Resources Director. And I've been working here in the town for 21 years. There was a time that there wasn't any standard mitigation when projects would come about. And if it was solely based upon natural resources and protection of a habitat, there would have been some sort of zero tolerance, which you can't have in this society of building and structures and impact. So over the years, Natural Resources looks at things like this in terms of, as it's explained in the letter, fish migration, eelgrass, and then shellfish habitat. Shellfish habitat seems the one that comes up most often in all these projects. Division of Marine Fisheries does categorize certain areas as shellfish habitat, either current or historical, so they look at it on a long-term basis. Herring River is an area that does get seeded. It does get shellfished by commercial shellfishermen, not that many. So when a project like this comes along, it's not so much that the Natural Resources Director supports something like that. It's just I don't have anything against the project as it was proposed. Possibly this is the first time I've heard that maybe they would cordon off a section and we'd not allow commercial guys in there. I think I'd get some pushback on that because they feel that they've purchased their permit. They have only certain areas to go to, but that's minimal in terms of the overall discussion. There are areas in town that are more suitable than others. I understand other towns do grade them A, B, or C, or high or low. Harwich just says they're present or absent, and that gives us leeway in this type of meeting to discuss it. The mitigation funds that are available to me to purchase seed and then replenish an area, I could use money that was from one project in one body of water and use that to provide seed in a completely another body of water. For example, maybe a Herring River mitigation used funds for seed I put in Round Cove. I haven't done that. I don't plan to do anything like that. My intention is to seed as close to the place that was somewhat disturbed that still provides good habitat. So that would be my plan in this case or any other case that's come before us with conservation, whether it be in Witchmere where there's a project, to seed as close to that area as possible. And that's our plan going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Heinz.
Hopefully you all have a revised comments letter from me. When presented with all of the information that was given to us and kind of looking at the evolution of this project, my interpretation of whether or not this does meet performance standards or not has changed since the beginning of this project. And it is laid out in the revised comments to you. I think it went from a project with many moving parts, the dredging, the dock in a different location, a dock in had in an area that probably had a little bit more shellfish, or spanned an area with more, to a project that I think is, while a dock, and I will say it is within land containing shellfish. There's no doubt about that, but it is the most minimal, I think, that you could propose to both get a dock as well as have the least possible negative or adverse impacts to the resource area. So I am recommending approval of this project. And the monopile design is not used very often. It does span the area where shellfish were found, and where the flow is. One of my main concerns was where the flow is, if there are shellfish with routine prop wash, could that have a negative impact? The sediment out at that depth is not really conducive to shellfish. So had they had piles in a salt marsh, had they had piles actually physically in an area where there were high concentrations of shellfish right there, or where the boat was going to be docked if there was a high concentration in that location, I would feel differently about this. And it all came down to interpretation of, or going with the direct, literal interpretation of the bylaw versus looking at the project for what it was and saying, is this going to have a negative impact? And if it is, can it be fixed within a year? Can it be brought back within a year? I think all the changes are positive. The grading, the height of 5 feet is more than required. The grading will provide better light penetration. The monopile is far less disturbance. The decrease in float size is less. And the case law that was provided as well lends me to believe if this was denied by the commission and went to court, it would be, not that that is an important part, but if we were to not succeed with that, we would lose a lot of ability to condition and control and be part of the project. So I think with a willing applicant to do the mitigation, Mark and I did have a conversation today about the monitoring aspect. We're always wondering what proof there's going to be for these negative impacts. And this is an opportunity to have some study done to that effect. I wouldn't recommend removing shellfish ahead of time. I wouldn't say precluding people can shellfish under there, but just removing ahead of time isn't necessary because you're not dredging and you're not putting piles where those shellfish are. So I would just recommend leaving the shellfish in there right now. But
You could encourage the people to shellfish before the project, during the shellfish, in the season from which the people are shellfishing.
yeah, I would just say there's no reason, there's no real reason to remove them because of this
I don't think
project
so.
itself.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So with that, I'm happy to open it up for discussion too.
Thank you, Amy. All right, let's have questions from the commissioners. Do you want to start, Stan?
I guess from previous meetings, I struggle with the literal interpretation of our bylaw. In one of the meetings, I think, Mark, you even said maybe it's time for the bylaw to be changed. And I guess that's what I'm struggling with right now. And again, I'm not technically competent at this, but the merit of what you're proposing seems very good.
Thank you.
compared to the previous two
Thank you.
proposals.
I'm saying thank you for all of us.
I guess the one question, and I'm not sure how to answer this, I like what you're the proposal to monitor within the year. I don't know if, and then possibly, if there was any detrimental impact to repair that through the additional mitigation. Can it go beyond the year? I mean, would that cure any potential impact that could be
A year would
done?
tell you if there was any, a year would lead you to believe that impact, if there was an impact, was caused by the dock. Beyond a year, if the dock's already been in, if at year 1 you saw no impact, but at year 2 maybe you did, I don't know if there's like a direct correlation. We can certainly chat about, since there's a 3-year mitigation requirement for the shellfish, maybe doing a 3-year monitoring of some sort. That's something we can talk about.
But even there, if, and again, I don't know if I'm just asking the question, if somehow there could be a long-term impact, once it's done, you can't fix it.
Yeah, right. Right.
If there's something going on that we don't understand is what I'm getting at.
Right.
The toughest thing would be if we have a benchmark for the Shellfish Survey now, and if it comes in, if somebody goes in there or commercially, whatever, and wipes out all the shellfish, then how does that impact the
True.
data that you're gonna take a year later?
Right, I know.
That could be problematic. But I think there's a way through it.
So, beyond that, right now, I think I'll just let somebody others talk with the potential to ask more questions later.
Yeah, I don't have any questions at the moment.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for listening to our concerns over the many months and for addressing them. And I thank you for the courtesy that this could be a sensitive hearing, and we thank you very much for the courtesies that have been shown.
You're quite welcome.
Greatly appreciated. It makes our job much nicer. We do have the regulation that says no structures within a shellfish area, okay? But we also have in 1.13 the fact that the commission may grant a variance upon a clear and convincing showing by the applicant that the proposed work or its natural and consequential impacts and effects will not adversely affect the interests protected by the bylaw. And I think you have shown, to the best of yours and our judgment, my judgment, that there will be, as far as we can figure out, minimal negative impacts. And the negative impacts will be more than compensated by your mitigation. I think changing the location to avoid dredging, and then pushing waterways to change the mooring, and then the monopile design, I think they're very helpful. And I think the information you gave us was very helpful. And in that Adams versus Falmouth, our decision has to be supported by some kind of substantial evidence, and I don't see that we have any evidence that this dock will significantly or cumulatively affect the resource area. And to the contrary, our own natural resource director has stated it will not. So I see no reason to deny a variance.
Thank you, Mark.
I agree totally with what you said.
Thank you.
John?
Just to be clear, I will be abstaining on this vote because I wasn't a full member when this first came before
Mhm.
commission, but I do have a couple of questions. First one is just structural. That is, what's the downside of the monopile design, and is it any more vulnerable to winter or weather damage than a traditional design? And what impact would that have on the immediate surroundings, like storms we had last winter? And I guess just associated with that, I'm assuming that the float and the ramp are coming out off-season. But
Yes.
aside from that, is this thing more vulnerable to storm damage than a traditional design?
My answer would be no. My opinion is no. There are a couple of fiberglass piling projects in town, but and I was going to bring a sample, but I didn't bring one, but the outside of the piling is quite slippery. It's also consistent. So what happens with wooden pilings is they're not consistent because they're trees and they're wedged sometimes. And the ice can grab onto them, and then you know what ice jacking is. And I've seen an entire dock come out of the water in one piece and lay on its side from ice. So because these pilings are slippery on the outside, plus they're consistent, there's way less, if anything, for the ice to grab onto. They're also quite rigid. Wooden pilings, I don't care if it's a greenheart piling, which is really strong, but when it's 10 feet out of the ground, I can push it with my hand and wiggle it. That doesn't happen with these. So they're much more rigid, they're very strong, and they're slippery. That's why they drive easier, but when they drive, it's like a straw. So what the Pearson piling people tell me is that the skin friction is double because you have soil on the inside and the outside. So they hold just fine.
Wait,
Skin friction?
I get that, but so, these things are hollow?
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that. I was wondering, what?
I probably should have brought the sample, but on a 12-inch piling, the wall thickness, it's a fiberglass composite. The wall thickness is almost 3/4 of an inch.
I see.
It's pretty tough stuff.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
My other question is for Heinz and Dr. Newberg, and it's about the mitigation business. That is, assuming it turns out that there's evidence that there is one way or another that the shellfish habitat is in fact degraded after a year, then are there alternatives for mitigation other than just throwing more seed out there or giving the town some seed that are going to be used somewhere else? What else can you do to fix that problem if it turns out to be a problem?
Good evening. I think you got to go over the hurdle to definitely define that was the cause. There are so many things that could have happened within the year. Yeah, one of them could be that structure, but to pin it on that and solely on that is difficult. Mitigation usually is in the form of replenishing seed, maybe not in that exact location. That's the first thing you would do is go elsewhere, nearby or across the other shoreline. If you were just addressing that, you're not going to bring in outside sediment. You're not going to change the water quality of an entire river that I think releases over 1 million gallons a day goes past there into the Nantucket Sound. So mitigation is certainly the best alternative. And I think that's where the town has put its efforts in over the years to provide that.
Through the chair, Heinz and I did the math, and the 90 bushels of seed with a 10% survival rate is 9 bushels, and it's enough to seed 105,000 square feet of beach.
But that doesn't address the issue of local degradation of shellfish habitat, and that's what's hung this commission up for months now about this project. And it's not just this project, it's a general concern. And how I heard what Heinz just said was, there's nothing to be done. In fact, you won't be able to tell, in fact, whether there is degradation. And even if you had some clear sign that everybody in the room agreed was evidence of shellfish habitat, there's nothing to be done.
Correct. And earlier it was brought up that, not that I wasn't opposed to it, but I didn't think it fulfilled the definition of significant. I'm sure everyone has their own definition of significant, but in my 21 years here, it did not exceed what I thought in terms of significant. I've seen much greater projects disturb much greater areas that were approved.
Can I add
Sure.
to that, in that I think the town of Harwich is exemplary in its efforts to clean up the water quality here locally. You've made regulations that have made surfaces to be, for example, around Witchmere Harbor, the surfaces that are adjacent need to be permeable, not impermeable. So you've got to use shell or stone. All of that, over the years, over the 20 years that I've been doing shellfish surveys here on Cape Cod, I've seen great improvements in water quality, the work that you did in Saquatucket Harbor with the new,
Yep, thank you.
is fantastic.
Thank you.
And all of those things, it's the, I say, it's the water quality stupid. If you can clean up the water quality, you can get better shellfish habitat. And so everything that you're currently doing, you shouldn't sell yourselves short here, because this town is doing a great job with cleaning up the water quality, and that's where it starts. And so you see all this black mucky sediment, that's gonna take 25 years to clean itself up, but we just have to keep working on this. I live in Falmouth. I say the same thing at the Falmouth Conservation Commission, so we keep working towards cleaning up the water quality, and that's going to benefit. I mean, look at West Falmouth Harbor is doing a great job, because they reduced the amount of wastewater that's coming from the plant up in the creek, in the Mashtucket Creek into West Falmouth Harbor, and so now the eelgrass is growing back, and in Boston Harbor with the abatement of sewage, we've got eelgrass going back, so it's the water quality. We get better shellfish habitat when we have better water quality. You guys are doing a great job, so don't sell yourselves
Thank you.
short there. Thank you.
All set, John?
I'm done.
Okay, I've got a couple. First, related to the multiple surveys, the, what was the East End Oyster Company found higher densities of shellfish and shellfish seaward of the mean low water mark. Yours did not. And any idea why?
Seaward of the mean, yeah.
Tempo.
I had
Just a guess as to.
mean low, I meant in my report, it should be mean low water, not mean high water, if that's what you're referring to, perhaps.
You mentioned it earlier as well, that there were no shellfish.
There were no shellfish 15 feet from mean low water.
Okay.
It's the sediment is, not mean high water, mean low water.
Okay.
The report had mean high water, so one letter changes everything.
Well, you said earlier, no shellfish were occurring seaward of the mean low water at this hearing.
That's true. The sediment was black and oxic
Right.
mud in that area.
So is it just the
15 feet from,
is it the slight difference in location, or is it possible the
you
survey
know, it's
just
all
missed
about
it?
grain size. I didn't look at the grain size further north to that, but given what I've seen here, it's entirely possible that the habitat is somewhat slightly different in the
Different.
sediment texture.
Yeah. There was a pretty substantial difference in outcome between the two surveys.
Yeah, what I'm seeing, so this is the survey from John Lowell, and what I'm seeing is, and this was before this smaller rendition of the pier, he's showing, looks like just shack, just seaward of the float, but of mean low, let's see, hold on one second.
This one is 4 cherry stones, this one is 1.
So it's right on the line.
He found quahogs seaward of the mean low water mark, and I went out there and dug as well and found it. What happens, the densities decline as you get further into the soft sediments.
Yep.
But there were quahogs along that edge, and they were some large quahogs that were seaward of the mean low water mark. So it's one of the issues with surveys. You know, sometimes you find out, portray what's there very well, and sometimes you don't.
These are 2 quahogs here, right alongside it, just not where, in that specific area where the dock's supposed to be.
Right.
Just
So,
the lay, the luck of the draw sometimes is what you
Could
find in
a
the pond.
quahog fisherman come along and harvest them in
Oh, yeah,
between?
it could have happened. In the meantime, you never
it's
know.
possible. It doesn't mean it's not habitat,
Right.
right?
It's where the sediment
It's still
changes.
shellfish habitat.
Yes,
And-
Yeah.
it's just not there.
And the densities that were found in the first survey were quite high relative to other surveys that come before us in the last
Yeah.
10 years.
Up over here, in this area, it's shallow, that's why we had to dredge. So it's more suitable habitat
Right.
further out, just the way it, in fact, there's a boat on a dock,
Dock or
this
mooring?
dock here,
Oh, yeah.
and the boat is aground at low tide.
Mm.
There's a big shoal right in here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry. I didn't show you, but
No, that's
this dock
okay.
here, that's where
That's
we are.
okay.
Yeah, we talked about the differences in the time of year that you do the surveys too, and what you might find.
Right. So I think that's one of the reasons why this commission had concerns, the previous previous hearings, we had high densities relative to any project we've seen or permitted before, so it's quite a bit different from 19 nons in that regard. The shellfish that are present, there were high densities of quahogs and oysters, so that's where the concern came from. I think that there's been some really good changes, modifications to help minimize those concerns. I think that the Wetlands Protection Act language relative to shellfish is satisfied. My concern remains with our bylaw. I've got a question for Heinz. Heinz, you've been here quite a while. Why do you think that language entered into our bylaws? There'll be no new structures allowed in shellfish areas. I mean, that's pretty definitive
That's
language.
a very short, distinct, no wiggle room type bylaw, and I came across it in 1998 when I first began looking at these projects when I was hired. And Tom Leach was our natural resources director at the time, and then he mentioned that little caveat that if it was proven such that he could work on it, I said, boy, I can't think of a single place in Harwich that isn't within 50 feet of a shellfish area. It doesn't have to be, and so over time, there were projects approved. So you brought it up, it comes up and up over again, but it's something like, so suddenly when does the ball stop? And you say, okay, this time we can enforce it. It's been suggested before, it either be removed or written with a little bit more language, but why it came up initially, I don't know how that was just one sentence, and had that been enforced from initially, you wouldn't have had anything built over time in Harwich. So I feel for those projects that ever were brought up against it, but if they were able to prove all those other things, they were given then the okay to go forward. So I don't.
Yeah, see, to me, it's pretty definitive, and there's a reason somebody put that language in, and somebody had a strong intent. And the same goes for the language on Pleasant Bay. It's very hard to put a new dock in Pleasant Bay, and part of the reason might be it's an area of critical environmental concern.
Yep.
But I look at Herring River, and I have just as much environmental concern for the resources of Herring River.
I just permitted a dock in Pleasant Bay and got because it
Not
needed
in
a
Harwich, though.
not in Harwich.
Right.
But it can be done.
Different bylaws.
It is.
So different town, different bylaws, so obviously between
Orleans.
what people were thinking in Pleasant Bay and what people were thinking with the bylaw, there was a lot of concern. And I think for a number of years, there were not new docks being permitted in the town of Harwich. And so this thing is, it comes and goes, but at the same time, in my feeling, these impacts are still there. I feel that I can't find a dock in Harwich that hasn't impacted shellfish habitat. The question is it significant? Is it a big deal? In many cases, it's not. But the premise that docks do not impact shellfish habitat, I take great exception with. I see again and again scouring impacts, impacts to the actual grain size under the floats. Floats, I think, are one of the biggest impacts that we should be concerned about with shellfish habitat. The action causes sediments to change, and shellfish do not do well directly under floats. So, I think the concerns are legitimate. I think this project has done quite a bit to try to dissuade those concerns, but I do think there's a strong reason why that language entered into our bylaws. When there's high densities of shellfish, that's when the concern should be elevated.
But where the float is, there's not the height, the densities are not, and the sediment is not conducive.
Right. It's not. At mean low, it's 2.5 feet exactly. So if you go a little bit inland from this, where the first survey occurred, at 2.5 feet mean low, I think you'd find some quahogs. So it's one of those, little tricks of the survey, with just an outcome of the survey, where, you don't find that much.
It's a positioning. I think it was moved to take into consideration I know it was moved to take into consideration shellfish habitat. It was moved to another area where the shellfish densities were lower.
Right.
To take that into thought.
I think we moved it first and then did the survey.
Well, that's true.
Right. It wasn't known ahead of time, and it worked out that way. Any other comments? Let's circle back to folks that might have new comments at the table.
I guess, again, the further discussion about the bylaw, not knowing who proposed it and why, not knowing, you know, I can't go back in time and hear what was being said and why, so that's a concern to me. I don't know if that's something that we need to address going forward.
Well, it depends how you, it's interpretation,
Right.
but it's also the rule that we all signed up to enforce. So we can change it in the future.
Right.
My thought is that somebody had good intentions because structures in shellfish habitat do impair
Right.
shellfish habitat. And so it's not, it doesn't come out of
Right.
thin air, and it's been there for a long time, so.
I look at it as a strong wake-up call that this is a very important area. Very short sentence, very strong. But we also have the ability, clearly stated within our regulations, that we have the ability to grant a variance, and as long as the proposed work is not contrary to the interests that we are supposed to be protecting.
Mhm. And we've granted those variances almost 100% of the time. So it's been really common. The difference here is the initial densities were the highest we've seen before us. And that's,
But legally, apparently, there is no definition to us as to what is significant.
right,
And
that's true.
that's a little
That's
bit
true.
difficult to
I get-
work with.
I guess my other concern is, you know, I see other existing docks that were grandfathered or whatever, and I see maybe they're not following some of the rules out there that what they should be doing with floats and whatnot during the year, and maybe are causing more harm than what this project might do.
Well, I would say it's almost guaranteed because they've done a lot to try to minimize impacts.
Right.
So I would say, sure, grandfather docks have caused much higher impacts than what a dock like this would cause. I'm just, viewing our regulations.
No,
And we're all,
and-
falling on one side or the other of
And
interpretation.
that was part of the struggle I've had with this right along,
Mine too.
it is not all black and white. There, believe it or not, with my accounting background, there is some gray area to things.
Right.
Not speaking to accounting though, right?
No.
No.
Oh, no, there's gray areas there.
Biology is all gray. There's
This is
nothing
a
black or
slight
white.
aside, but according to our regulations, the applicant is supposed to submit comments or letters from the Waterways Commission and/or the Harbor Master, as well as the Natural Resource Director. And have I missed Waterways or the Harbor Master's written comments?
It was in
Well,
the minutes.
you've
And
got
we did get a
Heinz.
letter from Heinz.
Well,
And we
I
do
got-
have a
I
signed
got
plan from
Heinz.
Waterways.
I got Heinz' letter, but in the future, I would like to see, similar to Heinz's letter, I would like to see the Harbor Master or the Waterways in the future.
Yeah, they didn't give us a formal letter, I don't believe, but we do have the signed plan, and then the minutes did,
But
well, I haven't seen the minutes from the
according to our
19th.
regulations, we
I
could
agree.
deny this project just on incomplete information.
No, we would postpone it until we got it, I think, but I can have that maybe Heinz and I can just chat with John and the Waterways about that in the future.
Maybe the applicants can put more pressure on them than we can to get it to us. But I would like to see those letters. I appreciated Heinz' letter to have his opinion clearly stated right in front of us.
In the past years, when we have gotten a letter from Waterways, their approach has been a general statement that just says that
No
they've reviewed the
adverse, yeah.
project and have no objections.
Right, true.
Because they're an advisory board and not a regulatory board, so they state it
Yeah.
pretty succinctly that way. And that's certainly what we'd expect, or what's
I
What's
would
coming?
like that to be an official
Yeah.
part of our
It should be.
information.
John has a question.
I just had a comment partly in response to what Stan had
Uh-oh.
said, but I think also to what I thought I understood Mark to be saying early on, which is you were citing all the other docks on the Herring River, and I understood that as a justification for why we should be deciding that another dock is okay, and that's kind of what you were saying as well, Stan. I mean, you were saying, but to me, it's the other way around. It's just a reason, you know, just because there are so many docks is not a good reason to add another one.
I understand.
No, that's not what I was saying.
Have no impact.
I was looking at the merit of their project versus what is out there now. I wasn't saying whether one should be added or not.
In theory, this dock would be better than all 36 of those. Because you have the opportunity to come forward with the best modern design.
State of the art.
Yeah, to, you know, it should be the best one, in Harwich.
There might be an alternative theory out there. Because there might be some docks that have no shellfish habitat. Not only no shellfish, but no habitat. So I would say that it's definitely an improved design over a number of existing docks. I think there's some docks that are in very benign places right now. To your comment, John, we can consider cumulative impacts under our bylaw. And it's something we have done before, but it's tough to do. And if we read that summary on case law, we'd realize that the courts did not view that argument very well because they wanted to see a little more evidence. And of course, there's no evidence. It's
Hard to provide evidence.
it's
It can't be quantified.
Well,
Right.
the other thing I like about this is the monitoring aspect of this, because we don't have evidence, and this will give us future references as to what goes on.
It should become part of our regulations for future docks going forward. Is after the fact monitoring.
Because right now, we're always questioning what is happening when the dock goes in.
Yeah.
And this will give us the ability to get some evidence for future.
Yeah, I'll be skeptical on a single year is going to show you much.
Well, we can, like we said, maybe we can go out.
I'm willing to work with the town on a monitoring plan. And I'm willing to invest my own time to help the town come up with a plan that may get to some of your cumulative impacts, because I'm a ecologist, I'm a biologist, and I've spent a lot of my time here in Harwich. And I know this area well. I would like to help you. So if it's one, you know, if it's one dock here, but then you say, well, you know, could you do 2 more just to help us understand things? I'm happy to do that on my own time.
Thank you. I want to make a comment on seeding to mitigate. And we had a project before us in Witchmere Harbor recently where dredging was needed to make your depth footprint. And so there would have been a clear alteration to habitat. And that's the case, to me, the proposal to seed is a far cry from habitat protection. So in general, I much favor protecting shellfish habitat and avoiding alterations over seeding. Seeding is a temporary product, and I would much prefer natural recruitment, natural seeding over that approach. It is to mitigate, so it has benefit, but I don't think it's the same category as protecting habitat. Any comments from the audience?
Okay.
Any further comments from commissioners? Okay,
Well, I guess before we vote anything, we talk about the monitoring is it going to be 1 year or more than 1 year?
You can put that in a motion if you wish. If
And
you're uncomfortable with the 1 year, it's something we can discuss about, but maybe we can go to the 3 years, since we have to do 3 years for shellfish, but, for shellfish mitigation. But you could put that in a motion.
How about the grading? We want that open grading, that grading?
It's on the plan.
Yeah, that's on the plan.
That is on the
Yeah.
if you were to do the 3, not the specific, you know, the monitoring mitigation, but the 3-year, can you stipulate what that might go for?
What do you mean?
Well, we're considering a potential project in the river,
Right,
which hasn't gone forward at this point.
okay.
But if we were to get that, if that project were to get approved, could that go towards that project?
Oh, potentially, so,
Can we specify that or no?
not right now, it would just go towards, so, if this is approved, the owner has the ability to either do the mitigation themselves and hire somebody to do, or do it themselves, or hire somebody to do it, or the town is willing to do that for them. With, you know, they pay for the seed, the town does the work. So that seeding money, if it was the town to be doing it, would go towards shellfish seeding in the river, or propagation of some sort of shellfish to help with water quality. So if you're talking about a potential oyster reef, then that would be in that same criteria. It would fit, essentially, if that's what the commission wanted to do. But that project hasn't come forward yet, so.
And I just want to confirm one more thing. There is no dredging at this point. Okay.
Zero.
Right, that's what I thought, right. I just want to make sure, because I'm just going back to our, the initial,
Stuff going on.
Been a long road.
yes.
Is there a feature on is the bench feature out of our size compliance? Is it,
The bench, I brought it up before, it's the 2x8 bench or whatever, is a little bit out of line with our 4-foot wide walkway width. That's up to the commission. We did permit it for 19 nons. That was on the approved plan, so it's up to the commission if you want to. Our regulations do state a 4-foot wide width of dock structure.
There's 7 feet of clearance, so it still meets the 1-to-1 ratio at that width, at that location.
Yeah, you want the height.
Just a question about that is, that's the kayak storage, that's what we're talking about, the thing?
No.
Oh,
No, that's
oh, that's
landward.
something different.
Kayak
Little
storage,
bump.
the kayak
The bump
storage
out
is,
here.
Yep.
I see, okay.
the kayak storage is basically,
It's just two 2x4 braces or?
yeah,
Pretty much.
at
It's minimal.
railing height, too. So you can just pick it up from the railing and walk down.
Right.
That's back at the beginning.
so would that be a variance as well?
Yeah, and they've asked for it, so it's up to the like I said, originally I had mentioned that would be inconsistent with our regulations technically, that little piece of things.
Okay. Well, I encourage any members to make a motion this time.
I'll make a motion to approve the request by Robert Darlene Turner, 18 Strandway, for the dock, and this also includes steps. Does this include steps in the stonework?
That revetment was approved under a different project.
Revetment, but steps in the revetment to get to the dock.
That's in the revetment anyways, because if the dock wasn't approved, they still need steps to get down to the beach.
Okay, so this only is
This is,
addressing the dock.
this is the dock.
I'll propose a motion to approve the proposed dock.
Second.
Okay, we have a second. As a matter of discussion,
Well-
any conditions?
Yeah, I'd like to propose that part of that, and the conditioning that we talked about, I'd like to propose a 3-year mapping or monitoring, rather.
Shellfish Study.
And the time of year restrictions from DMF.
Yes.
Right.
And also the shellfish mitigation that
The
we
3-year,
typically.
Definitely the
the
shellfish
typical
mitigation.
mitigation, but the monitoring.
Does your motion include the bench area, the variance request for the bench area?
Yes.
Okay.
And we may make this referring to Mark's revision number 3 in this
Yes.
as a reference, so.
The current one in front of us.
Okay. All those in favor, state aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? 1, 2 opposed. So we had 3 in favor, 2 opposed. The motion carries.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You know, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. This cooperation process is what leads to better projects, and that's us working together. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good effort on
Thank
this
you,
one,
did a
Mark.
good job.
Take care of ourselves.
Mr. Chair, can we take 2 minutes
Sure.
before?
Question? You relate
But I grew up in Falmouth, and my dad worked at Huey in the 50s and 60s. And I don't remember meeting those fortunately. Probably
The next item on the agenda is a notice of intent from the town of Harwich for Hinckley's Pond alum treatment to mitigate for phosphorus impacts.
We meet again. Good evening. Heinz Proft, Natural Resources Director. I guess we should start by, I guess this evening there won't be a vote or rendering of a supporter of the project. So it's kind of an update, provide you with some information that you already have in front of you, hopefully answer some questions that I can have with the help of Amy, hopefully kind of couch this in a position going forward. As you heard earlier tonight, I've been here in the town of Harwich for 21 years. Hinckley's Pond has always been part of my grand scheme of responsibility in terms of overseeing it, checking on it. It's the largest body of water we have that's entirely within Harwich. It's about 176 acres in size. Over the years, it's experienced several algae blooms. Over time, they became greater in duration and more significant. One that was notable was around the July 4th timeframe where we had to really close the pond with the health department. The closing of swimming, closing of bathing, wading in there, keeping dogs out of there. So it prompted the town to do a study. Town spent $30,000, hired a consultant to do an overall evaluation of the pond and its conditions. And from that came a large executive summary which talked about several options the town had. It recommended an alum treatment at the time. Alum treatment's been used in over a dozen ponds now on the Cape. It's successful, but funding was an issue. So through the Natural Resources Department, we approached the CPC, Conservation Preservation Committee. It was rendered a valid project, just wasn't funded. A year later, we tried again, and were denied again on the basis of funding, not the validity of the report or the recommended treatment. A year was taken off, and third time was a charm. This past town meeting, money was approved to pursue this remediation of the pond with the use of alum. What immediately took place in June is some additional samples were taken because the data was quite old at that point in terms of what originated that study. So as of June, we have the most current benthic samples. These are bottom samples of the phosphorus that we're trying to inactivate, which causes these blue-green algae blooms under the right conditions. And the town has now gone down the path of writing a request for a proposal, an RFP. It's in draft form. A lot of things have to be put together with that. I have not done it alone. I've gotten a lot of support from Amy, our town engineer, our assistant town administrator, and our town administrator to write a good RFP to do this. So it is a two-part project. One is land side. We're just addressing the water side as far as I know this evening, talking about what we might need to do to get approval for conservation to do that. And Amy will probably provide some of the permitting that we've kind of gone down the path and where we are. Probably the biggest hurdle some people first have is when they hear the word treatment or chemical application is this idea of, well, exactly what's being done or the idea of a safe process, which is interesting and ironic because alum is one of its biggest selling points is its safety. Alum is approved to be treated in reservoirs that are used for drinking water. They treat drinking water reservoirs with alum for their phosphorus. Hinckley's is not a drinking water body of water. So that alone already stands it above of a level of a drinking water that's treated. There are a few companies that do this work. They're licensed to do so. They'd have to provide their licenses. That's part of the RFP that's written, the history that they've worked with, references. The RFP designates the exact dosage that will be done. It's our goal to do this in the late fall when water temperatures are still above 40 degrees, when there's very little activity around the pond. We're trying to avoid the herring migration season, which is April and May. The best activation of that binding of the phosphorus takes place when the water is greater than 40 degrees. So we are in the process of trying to get this project completed, and one of the steps of the many is to come before you and kind of engage with you, give you an update, and kind of get a feedback of what else we may look at or answer or try to dig up. to give you a better sense of the project. Thank you.
Did you say this fall? Do it,
Trying to, yeah.
and you don't have a contractor in place yet?
We do not, because the RFP is in draft form. It has to be 20 or 2 weeks minimum advertised at that point. We might be able to write it in such that the permit on the town, as a caveat, will be in place at the time that we can go through and advertise. We can write it in general terms, what we'd like done. Because the application is really about a 10-day process, it's not a function of length of time. They could do it possibly in 3 or 4 days, but we don't want it applied in that quick of a manner. It has to be spread out and kind of checkerboarded through and monitored as they're doing this. So it's about, depending on weather, about a 10 to 12-day actual application. So if we're trying to do it before December 15th, it's possible, but if we don't attempt to do it, it won't get done this fall, and we could certainly push it till Plan B, meaning the spring, but again, I want to avoid April, May, and I don't know if the water will be warm enough in March and June. Certainly it's possible, but I think there's a little bit more activity around the pond in June than there is around Thanksgiving and Christmas, or first part of December. But I want to make sure we cross all the Ts and dot the Is and make sure that I don't want to rush anything either, but I've kind of been going as fast as the slowest link in the chain. So since town meeting, town engineer, Amy, administrator, assistant administrator, myself, working on these different parts of the project. Did I leave anything out, Amy?
No, I'm gonna
Okay.
speak a bit.
Okay,
So,
thanks, Science.
because I have been involved in the permitting aspect, I won't be giving, it's a conflict for me to be recommending one thing over another for you, but I will kind of lay out some of the facts, and which is what I tried to do in my site summary, is to give you an overview here. So just so you're aware, Natural Heritage, we have been in touch. We have submitted on top of filing with them, we have to do what's called a species review. We've been working with them on that, have not yet heard back from them for that. We have to do that before we actually file with with Natural Heritage. I have the file waiting to go. Tried to get a hold of them again this week, have not been able to. So that is going to be the most timely aspect of the project, because they give themselves 30 to 60 days to review once they get it. So we can't close on this tonight. So for the commission, we didn't print out the 95-page document. That was all sent to you via email, I think a couple of times for your review. Did print out the 10-page kind of alternatives analysis, because in my mind, that was a really critical piece to the application. And it is your job as commissioners to weigh in and whether or not this project, as proposed, is going to have an adverse impact to land under water bodies, estimated habitat for wildlife. We'll wait for NHESP on that one. There is bordering vegetated wetland around Hinkley Pond. Proposed application is going to be nowhere near it. Forget what else. And it is part of the herring migratory path there. So in your site summaries, I tried to kind of lay out the performance standards that this project needs to abide by. And a key thing is looking at the alternatives. And for the commission, just for Heinz's edification, we have to determine whether or not this is the most feasible, technically feasible alternative. Not monetarily feasible, but is this the most technically feasible, least adverse impact method of dealing with the issue? And is it going to be the option that works the best? Of course, we know this isn't going to solve the eutrophication input, which is coming from septics, from our practices on our land usage. I actually looked, and the watershed size of Hinkley Pond, the size of the watershed, the contributing area around it, is on the measure of 20,000 acres. So So anybody who lives, or something like that, somebody who lives within that area, it's not just people who live on the edge of the water, all contribute to this. So the town is trying to, you know, the Conservation Commission is working on its regulations for fertilizers and whatnot, but it should be an effort the whole town is kind of looking into. As well as the town is years out of it, but starting to sewer in the town, which is just gonna help our water quality as well. So I think any of these methods are really to provide almost a Band-Aid until we can actually start getting better water flowing into our ponds.
Sure.
So I'll leave it kind of at that right now.
If I could add that the town has successfully, with the town of Brewster,
Right.
treated Long Pond successfully. Now, successfully, if people have asked before, you know, is Alum successful? Not indefinitely, not forever, but within 2 decades, you're certainly at 20 years, and you can extend that with some of the things in terms of runoff or setbacks of any septics and things like that. That original study, that evaluation, that $30,000 study, yes, it was addressed to Hinckley's, but there's a section in the back of it, if you got to the right, it talks about the different alternatives that any pond could look at. It went into dredging, it went into aeration, it went into circulation, it talked about other things that you can do for the pond. But even when it came down to cost effectiveness, the alum treatment scored very high on that. Other things can also help the pond, but it involves repeated work, time, money, effort.
Thank you. Stan, you got any questions?
Yeah, if you apply the treatment, you mentioned how long will that last for? I mean, or work to
Yep.
reduce the
20 years at a minimum.
one
Yes.
treatment now
Yep.
will?
Yep.
Wow.
That dosage will bind the phosphorus into the bottom of the pond and reduce the chance of algal bloom for 20 years. You can extend that 20 years by taking care of input runoff, some of the setbacks of fertilizer, and you know, we have some cranberry bog owners on either side. They're doing the best management practices. They draw water off using it. So you can extend it greater than the 20 years, but that dosage that's recommended for Hinckley's Pond, based upon other ponds at that size and those treatments, you're looking at 20 years of success.
So
So the cost can be spread out amongst 20 years.
it
too.
binds the phosphorus down, and it continues to as
It
new
just
phosphorus
kind of seals it, yeah.
as more is entered into the pond?
Well, as more is entered, see, what you're addressing now is, it's never been treated as far as Hinckley's Pond. So you're treating the accumulation of
there.
80, 100 years or more. Now you're gonna bind it, now you kind of start from zero again.
Okay, so
Yes.
anything new will
Right.
not be bound?
Correct.
It
And if-
doesn't stay in the water column. It binds to the existing phosphorus and sinks.
Yeah.
It's called flock.
Right.
And so any new introduction, you'll start with extremely low phosphorus in the pond.
Okay.
So
So
if you could-
you're starting all over again?
Right.
to-
But hopefully you can reduce the amount or the rate that it's going in
Correct.
than it used to with all these other things.
Are we doing anything?
We're trying, there's some public roads around there, the health
yeah.
department deals with septic systems in terms of setbacks like that. Vegetation not being cut right down to the water's edge is something that conservation has looked at for many years too, to start buffering the pond, yeah.
And you
A
mentioned,
big benefit for Hinckley is going to be the new tech school instead of all the runoff from the entire
Oh,
site.
right, yeah, we
Yeah.
Going
talked
into
about
that
that.
wetland that leads right into the
Right.
bogs, which leads
Yeah.
into the pond, that is all gonna be treated and taken care of.
Diverted.
And in the past 10 or so years, probably longer, I mean, just my knowledge is the way the bogs are being managed, how water is being held, the amount of chemicals that they use now compared to what they used to use is much better. So there are we still have a ways to go, but there are positive things going on.
and you said besides Long Pond, there are other,
Oh, yeah, if I sent it to Amy, there's a wonderful paper on alum treatments to control internal phosphorus loading in lakes and ponds on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And the abstract alone is good to read, but I think I sent the whole link to you, or I can submit it again.
I don't have that.
It's a wonderful review of all the projects on the Cape.
versus what other what other treatments are being implemented?
Depending on the size of smaller, remember this is 176 acres, something like Skinnicket Pond, which is 18 acres in size, to address their algal problem. They did a solar bee, which is a circulating
right,
thing.
right.
My understanding when that was put in, it's working as it should for its size, but even what Skinnicket Pond has, they would need several of those to address what they have. So multiply that, extrapolate that into what you'd need in Hinckley's Pond. When Long Pond was looked at for an algal treatment, there was also an idea of running aeration back and forth in the pond. And not to be funny, but you would have to turn it into a jacuzzi to get the benefit of oxygen of Long Pond.
Yeah.
And the cost of running that and maintenance and so Hinckley's would fall in that too. And Amy made a good point, that treatment is only at 15 feet or deeper. So it's not,
Right, I saw some of
yeah,
it, yeah.
so these shoreline thing, now, it's not applied at the surface, it's applied just beneath the surface, so it then settles down. And, the best would be the calmest day you can, but it's kind of a solution, it's a combination of, it's aluminum sulfate and sodium aluminate together in a dose that then can go down and bind with phosphorus.
That's all I have for right now.
Are there any other land use changes proposed with this? Or is it-
Land use?
Yes.
There is a portion of the Hinckley's Pond project, and I don't know if this is the correct, the land use meaning the overlook from the bike path.
I
That's what
meant mainly just, the treatment seems like it'll be effective. That
Yeah.
seems pretty clear. But, it is ultimately a Band-Aid solution
Correct.
that'll have to be redone. A lot of money going into it, and it'd be nice to
Yeah.
see the real changes happen.
The nice part is that we have this long database of water quality for Hinckley's Pond. It has to be monitored while this is happening, and then after the fact, it'll continue being part of our water quality task force sampling program. We have tested for nitrogen, phosphorus, chlorophyll for more than a decade within my tenure, and certainly I would propose, if I'm not here, that it would continue as part of, because it's the largest freshwater body that's contained within Harwich. So you could really get a sense of how well it's doing. Long Pond, we had fish kills prior to that treatment. We haven't had a fish kill there. Hinckley's had a fish kill 2 summers ago. And that's low oxygen. It's related to that, but anything that helps the health of the pond is good for all the plants and the fish.
Orleans has banned fertilizers. I learned that yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there does seem to be some effect that you
Yeah.
may
Whole
know
town.
about this one.
Whole
You
town?
have
whole
your
I didn't hear that.
nutrients in the watershed
Yes.
that's going through the groundwater.
Wow.
Sometimes it seems anyway that, if you have a
Went to
golf
organic
course or some cranberry
Correct.
bogs,
That was
whatever, it actually,
Exchange
and a
item.
bunch of fertilizers put on, and it seems to have a more immediate impact, maybe can kind of jumpstart
Yeah.
an algae bloom or
You're right.
whatever. And that's what I mean by land use change.
The, that study did a pie chart and said, where is the phosphorus coming from in terms of percentage? The largest percentage,
Yeah.
nearly half, was the internal load, but this kind of runoff is part of it. Wastewater flow from Seymour Pond, a little bit of waterfowl stuff, and direct precipitation. So you can get after the biggest piece of the pie with that, but those other things, like the runoff from Seymour and Long Pond, but Long Pond's treated, so that should be good water coming through.
Yeah.
And, building and around the pond's edge.
No build zone helps.
Yeah, right.
Didn't have that years ago. Houses can be right up against the water.
I think not doing something would adversely affect all the interests we're supposed to be protecting in
Yeah.
the bylaws, so, but as far as choosing what to do, like these different options,
Yeah.
it's interesting to read, but I think I just have to leave the recommendation for to people of higher knowledge
And that's
than
what we
I.
did by hiring a consultant.
Don't look at me. This is not my knowledge base. I just put.
Yeah, I don't claim to be an
I just
expert.
I just put together the information for you.
I really can't even give an opinion as to what.
I can't give you an opinion. I work too much on this.
Yeah.
I just want something done.
We hear that quite often. Yeah, not doing anything does have a cost to it. It's not that the problem won't go away. It's still there. And, if you don't, the odd thing about phosphorus is you don't smell it, you don't see it until you've got that bloom.
Yep.
Then everyone raises their hands, but then, oh, we didn't see it this summer. The problem's still there and growing.
It was most recently done in Great Pond in Eastham. It'd be
Brewster's
interesting.
looking at a pond right now to do it too.
Orleans is also
Yeah.
considering.
Considering it, yep.
Mark, any comments?
Yeah, well, the only way to get rid of the algae is to get rid of the food source, obviously. Um,
Right.
When that's applied, is that applied granularly, or is it done?
It's, I was just reading, it's a compound that is mixed and then beneath the water surface, it's kind of injected with like a boom off a barge and then settles down. And that's what I meant. They can apply it faster than we are recommending it to because it has to have a chemical reaction. And then they kind of checkerboard. They don't just go here and then they go around the pond eventually with GPS. They'll cover them all, maybe treat it twice to get that dosage throughout. And they're sampling and monitoring as they're doing that as well.
Do you have an idea what the cost is? Only out of
Yeah,
curiosity.
about $500,000.
Really?
Yeah, now we have it, the money approved for that, we have a little extra money for contingency for monitoring and other part. And because more communities are doing it, not just in the Cape, around the United States, companies are being more competitive, and we're gonna mostly come in under budget from what we've projected with what we're hearing
Is there
now.
only one company that does it in
There's
Massachusetts?
two, I've been contacted by a few that said, hey, do you need any information, or do you need, and I said, we're in draft form right now. But they're ready to go. They're going in Maine and doing one of the companies, and again, they have all the systems in place, the licenses, the personnel, the holding, it's just, it's, from my perspective, I like that it's a beginning, middle, and end project. It's not a 3-year kind of every 6 months go back to do it. It's, it's kind of adding the medicine that you need to cure the ill, not indefinitely, but the best for 20 years being recommended. And we're not here at a point where there's gonna be any vote. We have the permitting still, and I'm sure I'll be in front of you again, but at least we won't start from, 20 years ago. You kind of have at least something to digest and think about, and we can answer, or I'll try to get an answer for you if something comes up. And then I will also send the commission the paper that talks about all the treatments that have taken place on Cape Cod. We're up to 12 now. And initially, there were a couple issues with the ponds, but they've just tweaked it and gotten any kind of bugs out, and they've learned how to do this at a much more efficient rate, which drives down the cost, and so that's good for towns that are looking at it now.
Any other comments, Mark?
Nope, thank you.
I think you might have a couple, John.
Question.
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I live on Skinnequit Pond.
Oh,
I'm pretty
okay.
familiar with
The solar bee?
with the solar bee, and I mean, I wasn't there when the initial problems happened, so I don't have any first.
I was.
Yeah, I understand. But I am aware that even now, even with the solar bee has made things better, but conditions are still completely anoxic on the bottom of the pond. The pond is not exactly healthy. It's more healthy than it was, but it's not fixed. So, I don't know, I have a bunch of questions. So, one is, in the report, the consultant's report, there was some mention of storm runoff hazards in a couple of different places. Has anything been done about those? I mean, they're a minor contributor to the problem, but I was curious.
It's a very good question. Not that I'm aware of. Some of them are public roads, some, I don't know if they're private, so the public road would be the town, but private roads, you'd have to talk to the homeowners there. Yeah, I think there's been some diversion. We have some homeowners in our audience today, but not that I am clearly aware of, that I was a part of, and I know anything was done.
Why wouldn't they be addressed? Why wouldn't that be just done up front? I mean, that's like an easy no-brainer, right? It's not, doesn't require $500,000 of dumping out.
It does, but you're not gonna solve the problem of the pond with
No,
that.
but still, it's, what do they say, $1 million here,
Yeah.
$1 million there, pretty soon you're
Right.
talking about real money. And, 1% here, 1% there, you've
Yeah.
gotta work at the margins, right?
Agree, but it's the hood ornament on a car is what you're describing.
Okay, well, all right, that was one question. It seems to me something should be done about that, but, so, I guess I have a question about your statement that it's 20 years plus.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I was looking for the place in the report and I couldn't find it, maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, But I thought there was a lot more uncertainty than that about the longevity of the alum treatment, that it could be anywhere from 6, 8, 10 years up to 20-plus years. And so my question is, what is the current data on Long Pond and the effectiveness, that is, the conditions now in Long Pond? What nutrients are coming out of Long Pond now into Hinckley's Pond?
Yep.
And what are the conditions on the bottom of Long Pond right now? Is it, I mean, you sent the data, and I confess I didn't register that right now, but, you know, at the bottom of Long Pond right now, is it still anoxic? Is it?
Yeah. Okay. Generally, the bottom of all ponds are going to be anoxic, especially if it has a deep little hole. You know, if it's, you have this kind of, let's say it's 30 feet deep river, but you have this 45-foot little indentation, that's where everything will accumulate. In fact, if aeration is ever done in a pond, you want to avoid that little gunk hole. There is data through the Brewster Natural Resources Department describing what's taking place at Long Pond, because the town shared that, but again, I could get a link and forward that as well.
But
Long
again,
Pond
isn't that an important bit of information?
It's fine. It has been successful there. We don't have the fish kills. The oxygen levels are fine. Setchi readings, that's how clear the water is. Herring are migrating in and out. But we're still within that window of when it was treated like this.
10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. I'd like to see it in 10 years from now, but we're not going to wait 10 years to address Hinckley's.
Sure, okay. Also have a question about, you stated at the beginning that alum is completely safe. And you specifically cited the use of alum in drinking water reservoirs. But my question is more about the wildlife in the pond and what effect I mean, aluminum is known to have potentially
Yes.
hazardous health
Yeah.
effects. And, you know, you can worry about whether that's going to cause problems for people swimming in the pond, for example, which that would be one thing. But what about all the wildlife?
Yeah.
And
Those
what
are-
effect is it having on the habitat? And not only that, but the pond is draining into the Herring River,
Sure.
and you know, it has, anything that happens there is going to have an
Yeah,
impact, right? on
it's a
the-
great question. Maybe I should, if I said the word completely, I didn't mean to say, I'll say the word very safely, applicable. But it's, again, everything in moderation, meaning don't need to dose it more than the pond needs. Alum was used in Long Pond, that water flows in Hinckley's, which then goes down to the river. It's not around the edges where we have this kind of floral. If we do it in the fall, that's less apt to affect any, you know, wildlife that's there. It's a 10-day kind of application period. Because it's a chemical, but I also think there's a danger to having an algal bloom, this blue-green algae, within its cell membrane breaks, it releases the toxin, it's green, you got kids with it on their legs, you got dogs drinking it. That's an also unsafe condition, which will more than likely happen before you have an issue with an alum treatment going forward for 20 years. I mean, there is a risk, I think, in either, but these blooms, which have come repeatedly and last longer in duration, are very visible. So,
Did you say there was a bloom this year?
no,
on
not this year.
July
We had a
4th?
fish kill 2 years ago, but the latest bloom, I think, was 2016. I'd have to check again. But the conditions there, it's kind of this mix of ingredient. You get the right temperature, the right water input, and then circulation, and then warm temperatures in the summer. And when it triggers, it logarithmically grows very quickly. You can't do anything about it once that happens.
A bunch of brown bullheads, right?
Yeah,
Catfish-like
catfish, yeah, bottom fish
species
were
that,
washed
had
up on shore.
that washed up because of the anoxic conditions.
That wasn't, so it wasn't a
That was
direct
2 years
effect of the
ago.
algae, it was just,
Of the eutrophication of the pond.
Algae
it
will use
was,
up oxygen as it grows.
So it was, yeah, because the algae soaks up all the oxygen that should be in the pond.
But I think you made a good point. I think the bottom of all ponds, I mean, the succession of ponds as they go through their success is to naturally fill and get shallower and get muddier and then
Right.
get woody plants and then eventually vernal pool. And, you know, it takes a long time, but that's if nothing's ever done. Ponds don't stay, it's not a static state like that. But when it's used for recreation, it's a large body of water and it's a town resource, yeah.
so, other towns worry about this and have done different things, right? And I'm aware of active discussions, I guess I would call
Sure.
them, in Orleans in particular, about various
Alternatives?
various alternatives, some of which are untested at this point. Are you aware of?
I know of some, I know of the aeration one, I know about dredging, I know, but I don't, if there's one
Well,
specific
the
you're.
aeration, is specifically the aeration things that have been discussed for, I forget which ponds over there.
You mentioned Skinnicket Pond, the one you live on, we used aeration there as well. We did it, it just wasn't,
Before the solar.
before Solar Brew, we had aeration in Skinnicket, we had it in 2 locations, it was loud, the pump, and 2 was in just in a little area, we also used barley straw, so.
Right, well, the problem with aeration is you pump a lot of air in it, and it bubbles up and
Correct.
fills the pond immediately, so it doesn't necessarily effectively add oxygen, right, which is what you're trying to do, right?
It affects oxygen at some level, but not like, you can't keep it suppressed in the water. No, it's gonna reverse and bubble off and effervescent off the top. It helps, but not to what you think you're doing. It helps, but again, the size of aeration that was required for Skinnicket was a lot more than was applied. When it was scaled out for Long Pond, like the analogy of a jacuzzi in Hinckley's would be the same if you tried to do aeration. And the cost of that is very expensive when you look at overtime, the maintenance and the electricity and the pump house and all that. It starts to approach. The Hinckley's Pond remediation is expensive. It's $500,000. But if it's $500,000 for 20 years, do the division on that, then per year, it's a little bit more palatable.
That's all for now.
Oh,
but
no problem.
Probably not.
Yeah.
You can come back to me again.
Yeah, sure.
I've
And
got-
I'm not an expert, I just, what I've kind of picked up, or I can find an answer.
Well, I've got 3 questions.
Oh,
One-
okay,
One is, I want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing, the settling agents on this,
okay.
right? And in there, it says reapplication typically necessary at least once a year under the mode of action.
In our case, I wouldn't.
Yeah, that's, it should.
And then the other part said applicable but will not prevent recurring blooms unless coupled with a phosphorus inactivator.
That's an alternative, right?
No,
Alternative
it says
scenario.
applicability to Hinckley's Pond.
That's-
I'm just looking at the summary,
Yeah,
All the alternatives.
yeah.
That's an alternative scenario.
yeah.
Maybe I misunderstood this.
Yeah, each of these is an alternative scenario.
Alternative to the alum
But
treatment.
I get, well, then my other last question, and forget those 2 then, is at the end of the 20 years, what happens is this all explodes back into the pond?
I don't think it's like a light switch, but I think then the probability of an algae bloom increases each year afterwards.
Gradually gets released, so
Well,
there
is it-
is the potential for another treatment being needed 20 years down the road. Hopefully not as much, but
Okay,
it is released, because
okay, so it's releasing gradually
Yeah.
after the 20 years or during the 20 years? Plus, we're putting in.
No, that's my, I think it's what's coming in is starting to accumulate until it reaches the kind of the
No,
threshold.
but this was bound
Yeah.
for 20 years, so
Sure.
I'm trying to understand, does that mean at the end of 20 years, what was bound at the beginning
It's
just
been-
releases back and
Yeah.
like decomposes?
I don't know that answer. I don't know if it's a.
There's new inputs that will continue. And
Not the new input, but the stuff that we bound originally, does
Bound,
that release
that
back
reaction takes
into
place?
the pond at that point?
I don't have that answer. I think it's supposed to remain bound, but with new inputs, we'll slowly, we have, if you want to speak just to this specific question, then I'll call.
Well, after, because I also have 3 of his questions I would like to respond to also, if I could, when you're finished.
Okay.
So going back to what you were saying, maybe that at the end of 20 years, it's the introduction of new phosphorus coming in that
Or the accumulation from year 1 that started.
to,
And 2 and
to
3 and
release
4.
again.
Yeah.
Okay. And at that point, well, we don't know,
Yeah,
20 years from now,
yeah, you'd
hopefully
think-
something will change.
Yeah, either you say,
before
wow,
the
that was worth
technology
the
or
money,
something.
or the cost of a treatment may have gone down.
Or the
If-
technology
yeah.
might change.
something we can look at too is the project in Barnstable, that was about 15 more than 15 years ago at this point.
Okay.
That one had some issues to start with, but we could see maybe what their data is showing. That's one of the oldest projects on the Cape is project in Marston's,
Hamlin Pond.
Hamlin Pond
Yeah,
in Marston's Mills.
1995.
That was a rate of application, really had some
Yeah.
problems there.
I think
Right.
they've learned how to
Oh,
avoid,
yeah.
they dropped the pH too quickly, and
Yep.
they
Yes.
had fish impacts, and
Yep.
I think they've learned how to avoid that application
It
impact.
was one of the first ones ever done.
Right, but, yeah, I don't think there's a longer data series than that, so it is a question mark, I think, on how long it's gonna last. I've heard 10 to 15, up to 20.
Right.
But I think, we don't really know that. I think our job is to just look at alternatives and see if the potential impacts are something we can accept. I think alum treatment will resolve the symptoms. I think that's clear. We've got a green pond right now. Alum treatment will turn that clear. And it happened in Long Pond. You might recall the evolution of Long Pond. It was super clear 50 years ago. It was a delight, and then it slowly got green. For 20 years, it was really green. And then alum treatment turned that around. So I think it will resolve that problem. The question is there a better alternative, and are there impacts that we don't know about? So I look forward to reading that study.
Sure.
I do know Santuit Pond and Mashpee, they've had extensive solar bees active for a long time, and it's not really keeping up. That place was flowing green in February, March, April. It doesn't seem like, for the amount of cost that's gone into the solar bees, it's keeping up with the phosphorus problem. So I don't see a strong alternative.
So, if I may,
Mhm.
I'm aware of some newer technologies which are pretty much untested, and I don't know that they would be a candidate here, but which we should be thinking about, I think, which put very small bubbles of oxygen or just atmospheric air into the bottom of the pond, and the bubbles are so small they don't rise up in the air column, in the water column. And it's a way of adding oxygen to the sediment to feed some of the critters who will consume phosphorus. And I know they've been arguing about this in Orleans, but and the availability of this technology is a little bit unclear at this point, and its validity is also a little bit unclear, but the basis for it is, I think, pretty well established.
Maybe for reducing the anoxic layer, but I don't know about reducing phytoplankton production. Yeah, I don't know how that would address that problem. All these ponds are anoxic, it's called a hypolimnion. It exists naturally. Eutrophication exacerbates that. And so the Cape has all these anoxic layers that are much bigger than they should be naturally. And that's, that phosphorus comes up in the water column with storms, it circulates, and the phytoplankton, blooms. Even though Hinckley hasn't had a bad bloom, it still has really degraded water quality, in my opinion, because it's more turbid. I guess what I'd like to do is maybe, I think we might have someone that has some good knowledge that might help us out, so I'll ask for comments from the audience, and I'll start with you.
Good knowledge, but I just have questions you asked going up. Yes, sorry. I share your concerns about...
Could you identify yourself,
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry, I'm Stanley Selko. I live across the street from the pond, like these folks here. Stormwater runoff, because why are we treating the the phosphorus in the sediment when we have stormwater running in the pond? And the report from 2012 identified, 15 to 20% of the phosphorus, I believe, comes from stormwater runoff. Peter DeBacher is a resident around the pond. He was head of our, I don't know if you know, was our wastewater committee for a number of years. He has talked with Link, and he has talked with you, Amy, or he's going to talk with you, and for not a lot of money at all, they're talking about having two things. There are two bad places, Catherine Rose Road, where there's bad runoff, shown in that report, and there's another one on the other side. And for very little money, they can mitigate the stormwater runoff and have it go into the soil and be properly treated by the soil. Does aluminum hurt wildlife? To me, I was looking at this, and one kind of wildlife that could be hurt by aluminum is benthic organisms, the organisms in the bottom of the ponds. If you Google alum treatment benthic organisms, the top hit is I don't know if I sent it to you, Heinz, or not. There's a study commissioned by the EPA in some journal of pond treatment or journal of pond health, and they studied the effect of 2 ponds in Vermont. This is researchers at University of Vermont and an EPA researcher, and they studied the benthic organism impact of alum treatment, and in both cases, the benthic organism count went down after treatment, and within a little more than 2 years went up above where it had been previously. So the alum has a short-term negative impact, and then it comes back. And I'm sorry I don't have it, I could send it to you, but also if you just Google.
I trust you.
That one's there, thanks. Aeration, I don't know if the solar bee, is that the ones that are the solar collectors?
Has a solar collector, and it has an impeller.
Right,
that
okay, I've
sucks
seen
water up from, well, in the case of Skinnequit Pond, it's like 8 feet or something, and just augers some oxygen by circulating the water.
And that's in the 2012 report. The problem is that works for about 10 acres, and that would call for about 17, and Hinckley's Pond, that wouldn't be allowed, because we are an FAA landing strip. That's not a joke. We have
No,
a seaplane.
there's a seaplane there.
We have a seaplane there. It hasn't been flown for some years, but we are still an FAA landing strip, so it's illegal to do the aerobees, have 17 aerobees in our pond in case someone wants to fly in. We are still we're on the air charts as a landing strip.
Really?
My last one, I'm curious about the 20 years, because people I've talked to said when aluminum binds with phosphorus in a molecule, the half-life is very long. So I'm not sure why it would break down. The half-life is namely, if you have this molecule, you put the aluminum in with the phosphorus, it makes a molecule. Now it's bound with the iron releases it in anaerobic conditions. When the aluminum bonds with it, it doesn't release it. The half-life, when will that molecules break down? It's very long. I thought it was much longer than 20 years. I don't know.
No, I think it's one of those under-promise, over-deliver type things.
I think you do nothing about the source of phosphorus with this treatment. It just keeps coming into the groundwater and the surface flows. So I think that the material stays bound with that treatment, but it's new inputs that slowly cause the phytoplankton to take off.
And 50% of the phosphorus, as Heinz said from the 2012 report, is in this sediment as legacy from the bogs when they over-treated and over-fertilized in the past. So 50% will be gone. We are adding new right now, and we have a pond association, which is working with people around the pond to lower fertilizer, and there's a fairly active association working with homeowners, not just to look at stormwater runoff, but also do you really have to fertilize your lawn? Do you really want a golf course type of lawn right around the pond? So they're doing a pretty aggressive work with owners of land around the pond to try to mitigate this, try to convince people not to fertilize or lessen fertilizer.
Do you know what percentage was non-legacy septic inputs?
Septic?
I got it. The stormwater was 6%. I just saw that. That's the stormwater.
Because that's the percentage that you're not really going to tackle until you sewer it.
That I think will be, because if you talk to Peter, that I think stormwater, I think is going to be addressed, and not a lot of money. So, I'll let him, but anyway, thank you for the time.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments from the audience?
My name is Ralph Anderson. We live in the summer on Catherine Rose Road, and we have frontage on the pond. I've been part of the water sampling effort for the past 18 years. I'd just like to review some of the facts that have been put forward. One is that the 20-year forecast was based on continuing the sources of phosphorus that are being added to the pond. Given the difficulty in justifying cranberry bogs in this economic environment. I believe it's really not very likely that 20 years from now, or over the next 20 years, we're going to see people dumping a lot of fertilizer into the pond because of overuse of the bogs. The bog owners have told us that they have drastically decreased the amount of phosphorus and other chemicals that they're putting in, one, because of economics, and two, because of the pressure from the Cranberry Bog Association and their public relations. The second factor is that the high school takes and drains water in across Route 124 into the bog, 17-acre bog, and then the 17-acre bog dumps that into the pond. When the high school is rebuilt, they're going to change the grading on that, so that major source of water that flows through the pond, flows through the bog into the pond, will be eliminated. Why is that important? It's because the cranberry bog owners are committed to holding the water from rainstorms. But they say, we can't hold all the water that's coming from the high school. So, in fact, they don't have a holding facility. When the high school gets rebuilt, that water will no longer be there, and the bog owners can then retain the water from rainstorms. If they've just put their fertilizer in, the last thing they want to do is have it washed out, so they want to hold it there. The last point is that about 12, 14 years ago, when Skinnequit was putting in the Solar Bee, I got a quote from the Solar Bee people, and they said that smaller ponds, there's a pretty good effect from the Solar Bee. They said somewhere between 10 and 14 of these islands would be necessary to affect the algae parsing in the pond. The Solar Bee works by generating water that's in motion, and that takes and changes the preferred algae from a blue-green algae, which is the stuff that causes the real problems, and the preferred algae then is a green algae, which is not. But all the time this Solar Bee is working, what it's doing is it's preferring not to have the bad algae grow. As soon as you turn off the Solar Bee, all that phosphorus is there. And if you don't have the water being stirred up, the blue-green algae is going to be the one that takes over. So I think that the effort that's gone into studying this over the past 20 years, 18 years, whatever it is really paying off. I hate to see the Herring River be burdened with the blue-green algae again.
Thank you for your efforts. Did you find that
I
percentage?
did, yeah. I think direct stormwater was 6%, and I can send that around too. But
I'm just curious. I'm gonna.
It says before treatment and then after what the perceived on like the top chart, how the phosphorus loads are.
Internal load.
I think that's in the big report.
Yeah, that's in that big
with
report,
the link
Yeah,
that I
I'll look at
sent
that.
around too.
It doesn't separate legacy from present load. It does say a lot comes from Long Pond, which is
Yep.
interesting. So
I'll leave you with that.
I'll
And that
take,
too-
you can grab that. I'm gonna get the report and look at it. I think we all should, dig into this a little bit. We need to see the letter from Natural Heritage, and we need to see a letter from, I think, Division Marine Fisheries as well.
Yep, so it does, just so you're aware, it does not need a Chapter 91 license, because it is not going to be a structure. It does not need a 401 water quality certification either, which was kind of a surprise to me. But we are waiting for Heritage. So,
DP has a specific permit for this, I think. Is that? I think DP checks off on this somehow.
I thought that they were going to do the 401, but
It's
no.
Maybe we got a letter from them or.
We got an email saying they were not requiring it because of the method of proposed application.
Yeah, they have an invasive plant control permit,
Yep,
and I don't know, I wonder if Allen is under that.
yeah,
Like, if you wanna treat herbicides for an invasive plant, you have to get a DEP permit.
yeah. Part of what I was helping was kind of running it through the hoops to try to see what was needed.
Mhm.
And the only thing that other than local conservation, obviously, the notice of intent has gone to DEP as well,
Yeah,
was Heritage.
yeah,
And they did say, and I put it in my report, what they most likely are concerned with is a nearshore plant, which this should not have an adverse impact.
mussels, I think they, in the past, they have expressed.
Maybe, but that's not
yeah,
what they told me ahead of time.
Interesting. Yeah,
But I wouldn't be surprised because
freshwater mussels.
if this sinks to the bottom.
All right, well, why don't we
I just-
continue?
Just have one more, hopefully simple question.
Okay.
Which is,
Pardon me, sorry.
Amy sent a bunch of data files that you had provided to her from when, 2012?
2012 to
2012,
present? Yeah,
2013,
from the,
2014, 2015,
Do you have
2016,
data going
2017.
further back
I
that
do.
you can share?
Yep.
I would really like
Yeah.
to see it as.
I'll send it around if you get it to me.
Okay. All right.
So our
well,
next one is the 17th. You won't be
I will not be
here.
that week.
So it's up to the commission. We probably are not going to have, honestly, probably not gonna have something from Heritage by then, because like I said, I had to do the species review first.
Mhm.
Haven't even submitted the actual application yet, because I can. So I hate to push this off to November, but it's looking like November 7th.
You said you were hoping to do this fall. What's the deadline?
I
You would
might
think?
be able to, I know, this is off the cuff, I have to work it through town administrator. Can we write the RFP that says, if we get that by November, I'm sure we could select a company based upon their bid to treat it, and that bid would carry
Yeah.
through November, carry through December, carry it to next spring.
I think you
And
can
then
do some of the legwork now,
Yeah.
but
So,
we don't know if we're gonna prove it yet.
Right.
But
Yeah, it can be written, it has to be approved by, and then, then.
I
then
would
get
say
rid of it.
that probably.
Take it as far as you can.
Yeah.
Okay, I move that we continue until November 7th.
Yeah, I don't see it happening, and you're not gonna be here, so I wanna,
Heritage's not gonna respond in 2 weeks.
they're not gonna respond in 2 weeks, no way.
We kind of have to have natural heritage letter.
We have to.
Yeah.
I second it.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Heinz.
Thanks, Heidi.
Motion carries.
Stan seconded that?
Yes.
Or Jim?
I did.
We
Thank you all
skip,
for coming.
We skipped the,
Oh, yeah, we need
the
to-
continuance.
Well, if we need to continue officially, they gave me a request this afternoon,
to any particular date, or?
the 17th.
Okay, well, I move that we continue the notice of intent for the King property at 30 Loftus Avenue until October 17th.
Second.
Second by Mark. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Same thing for 53 Strandway.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to continue until October 17th. at The request by Paul Tinsley at 53 Strandway to raise the existing dwelling and construct a new dwelling with pool and septic.
Second that? Jim, got it seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
I can't even vote on this, I can't vote on continuing hearings that
No, you don't have that. To continue them, you need, that's fine.
Hey, Amy,
Yep.
these were a couple of the,
I don't need them, I have them too.
I know,
Okay. I'm gonna do the certs.
it's bad.
It's bad. Hip bone's connected to the thigh bone.
Mm.
Do the certs of compliance.
Sure.
Let's do the first one. The other ones, other than the first one, I think we can all do together. This first one is a little explanation. I am recommending a certificate, so it's up to you if you want to do them all together or not.
I think, given the timing, Amy, if you want to point out any issues that need discussion. And that'd be fine?
The only thing is, for 18 Snowin Road, this is was a vacant lot on the corner of Davis Lane and Snowin Road. And, everything was complied with. They do not have irrigation in the 0 to 50. They have temporary above-ground irrigation for the mitigation plantings. The mitigation plantings were a little sparse. They did some replanting. And then, if you recall, they also came in for an invasive management / view plan amendment, and they did do that work. I noticed when I went there in the summer that, first of all, the shrubs and the trees look great. All the invasives are gone. They had seeded with like a Harmony native grass mix on the slope, and it was starting to come in. Didn't look great though, but they're like, okay, it's just starting. We just planted it this spring. It's starting to come in. When I went back there a couple weeks ago, it's bare. So I contacted the land management team, and they said they would take a look at it, and they came back and they said it's the same thing that's happened on other sites across the Cape, that they've used that particular, not just that, but that batch of grass seed mix or native seed mix, and it just didn't work. So they've actually reseeded it already now. So I would just recommend an ongoing condition that that bank needs to have a stable ground cover on it. Everything else is in compliance on that one.
Amy, this particular property is up for sale.
It has a PNS.
Okay. But that slope is barren. It's,
Yes, and it did, I have to say, I saw it June, July, and stuff was starting to come up, but it was very patchy. There are the trees and the shrubs, but there's just no ground layer there. It's matted.
it's not very dense.
There's
On the
a
slope.
lot of invasives, but it's mostly trees now. So I said they've really got to seed that.
Are they irrigating or temporary irrigation?
Temporary, yeah.
So they are getting water on it.
Yep, it's not that, it was the mix.
It's a good slope.
It is.
It's a good slope. You can water it and it'll run down and
Yeah, they need to
wash
do
it
a
away.
real gentle temp irrigation on that. No, they said it was the mix, it was just wasn't a valid mix.
That happens.
It does. So I would just recommend that, the condition that they have to keep a native ground cover on that slope, no matter who the owner is. It transfers with the property, not the owner, so. The other ones I recommend certs, 6 Aquatucket Point, these are all ones that have expired, so they can't do work anyways. We have that new permit for them that came in front tonight. Division Street, work was never done to convert a duplex into a single-family dwelling. And then the Olsons, they did a very nice job on their pruning. They limited it to lowering some shrubs, not by a whole lot, and then pruning up of some trees in specific corridors. They work with me really well on it. So I'd recommend certs for everybody.
Thanks, Amy. Just a quick comment on 6 Aquatucket Point. So maintenance dredging of that scope, I think I wish that we had asked for an as-built plan. So it's not so much a comment on the cert, but looking forward.
Absolutely.
So
This one will have it.
we didn't discuss it, I don't think, but,
It got continued anyway, because we
yeah.
had to wait for Heritage.
yep. So I think that's fine to approve this, but that's a big footprint. And
Mhm.
so the as-built would be nice going forward. Well, there's no other comments. Maybe somebody wants to approve the motion to approve them all.
I would move to approve all the aforementioned certificates of compliance.
I second it.
Stan seconds, all those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Okay.
So for this
All
first one,
approved.
I'm sorry. This first one, there are 2, because it was recorded under different owners, and we did 2 forms, so please sign both of them.
I have a question on the dredging. I'm glad it's still open. We approved the dredging for Oyster Creek off of Allen Harbor, and they presented their case saying it absolutely needed to be done. Boats were going aground, et cetera, et cetera. we approved it, but then when I spoke with one of the owners there and said, oh, have you done the dredging? She said, well, no, we don't have any intention of doing it for another couple of years. So we gave them 3 years to do it. And they have no intention of doing it
So
until.
if they go for an extension, give them a year.
Well, my question is on this maintenance dredging and things like that. Are we going to give them permission to do maintenance dredging? Or are we going to give
As long as it stays.
Saquatucket Point a 3-year? Or can we give them, you know, this project has to be done within a year and a half or 2 years? It seems to me conditions could vary
Well,
within 3 years.
Well, if it's a notice of intent, 3 is typical, right?
3 is typical, but maintenance, we do allow, on like the town permits, maintenance past that. What they would do is, when you ask for a certificate of compliance, you allow for maintenance dredging. You have a condition in there to begin with saying maintenance dredging, but then you have an ongoing condition at the certificate of compliance. So long as it conforms with the dredge plan, it doesn't stray or stays in the same footprint. We have allowed maintenance dredging of that.
So what does that mean? I mean, ongoing forever?
Unless the footprint changes, the volume, then they have to come back.
I'd say there's few cases where I'd feel comfortable doing that, but it could happen.
We can just, can't really discuss too much on that one right now, because we're not talking about that
Right.
case anymore.
Right.
We could do thresholds type, we've done thresholds before too. That would trigger a hearing versus just going ahead and doing it. Couple of quick discussion things. 177 Forest Street, the last time we went around and did site visits, I brought those of us who were there out to 177 Forest, and people who were there seemed to be in agreement that what was out there flagged was what we talked about during the actual on-site hearing we had. 500 square feet towards, closer to the edge of resource area in the lower area, but kind of on the corner, and then 500 square feet towards the top. Does anybody have any questions on that? He's not here tonight.
The photos look good. I would just say, is there a modified plan that reflects that that's the target?
What I was going to do is, if everybody was in agreement, then I was going to tell him to modify that plan.
Not to throw a monkey wrench, but after looking at it, and I made that comment to you this
right.
afternoon, looking at that, I would put the whole 1,000 feet down
Yeah.
below.
Well, that's what I
I
wanted,
think
Richard.
we all, yeah.
Because to me, up on top, you know, looking at what we're doing now, it's, why bother up on top? Use it at the bottom, but.
Well, that was my feeling. I just don't know if we kind of struck a deal in the field. Do you think that was kind of an agreement?
I don't know. I mean, I admit I had a misunderstanding of where you had wanted it to begin with. So it is up to you. It's an enforcement action
Yeah.
because of what was done on that property. We have kind of, I think, since then led him to say, okay, 500 and 500. So I think
He doesn't want to fill in that patch. He wants to keep that open ground so he can use that back area. Given the seriousness of the infraction, I felt that we would have wetlands plants there, and so allow some of that lawn to be returned to, to plants or buffer. And he doesn't want that, so that's why the
Right.
space up there is. And it's up to everybody as to how hard you want to, push this. There was somewhat of an agreement at that site visit where many of us were there, kind of like a compromise.
Yeah.
So I think it depends. You guys went out there today and saw it again?
no.
No,
we went out there
the
2
last
weeks-
time, 2 weeks ago.
I think my question would be, how much more can we get out of it?
We could just say we want all, 1,000
1,000.
square feet, all 1,000 square feet right there, which, would do a greater benefit to the resource area, or the buffer zone relative to the infraction, but I'm almost leaning towards feeling that we kind of had an agreement in the field.
Yeah, I don't know how fair it would be.
I
Yeah.
don't, I guess that's my point. I don't think it would be particularly fair to do that.
Right.
I'd like to see more, but I don't think you're gonna get there.
Well, he's planning, once we get this finished, to come back with another application for more work, so
Mhm.
you'll have another bite at the apple.
Okay.
We know where we want the mitigation to go.
Yeah, just wanted to make steady, slow but steady progress on the site would be really good.
So 500 is 5 by 100 or 10 by 50. You know,
The bottom area is 10 by 50.
Mhm.
The top area is a mix between 6 by something and 14 by something.
yeah.
It splits the difference. Do you want it? I mean, it's more of a sketch on a plan where it is. If you're comfortable, I can direct him that it can be done. We're still in fall, it can be done now.
Yep. Did you flag it yourself?
Nikki and I did,
Oh,
yeah.
see, then, I think that's good. If it doesn't turn out the way the flags are, then we're not happy.
No, and I photographed it after to
Yeah.
make sure things don't move.
Be nice to see it done this fall. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. Can we just, if we're in
something done.
agreement with
Yeah.
it, can we just tell him to do it?
Yep. Sure.
Okay, good.
Would you like a motion to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
To support, to go forward with the planting at 177 Forest.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the proposed planting at 177 Forest Street.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All in support? Motion carries.
The garden club would like to install a bench in their native garden at the Chatham Road entrance to Thompson's Field. It is your property, your jurisdiction, so they need approval from you.
Who
Stone bench.
wants to do that?
The garden club, who
Oh.
are the ones who built that native garden to begin with. Just one stone bench.
Yep. It's
Yeah,
not,
got
not,
no problem.
not a regulatory request. It's not a resource area.
Still need to vote, though.
Yeah,
to-
because, yeah, we manage it.
I would move we accept the bench from the garden club for that given location.
Second.
Second that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
So, a couple of years ago, several years ago, 2014, 4 years ago, the Conservation Commission approved an extension of the jetty at the east end of Red River Beach landward to better, one, protect the resource because we're artificially silting in the entrance of the Red River
Yeah.
because we're adding so much sand to try to keep that parking, that bank stable, that we're actually artificially silting it in. We approved it, the state denied it, because it was not protected, it was rock that was not protecting a pre-78 dwelling. Since that time, the state has permitted a couple that I'm aware of that really are not very similar situations that are not protecting pre-78 dwellings. I'm not a big fan of rock, but I think in this case, it's a better alternative because we are doing more damage than good with this, with trying to keep the erosion at bay there. A thought I had was applying to the Community Preservation Committee for both recreation and conservation interests for some funding and refiling that notice of intent to see if we get a different outcome with it. You can't really officially give your support because you have to review the notice of intent first, but is there anybody who has any real reservations about pursuing that avenue?
Where do you, I know what you're talking about, where the river, yeah, it's filling in, because I've been walking that beach for over 20 years.
There used to be a little mooring field there, so at the turnaround,
Right,
if you walk on the back side,
right,
it has eroded
it's cutting in, right.
We have we've done alternatives, put sandbags there, put filter fabric, tried to plant it after, and it just,
So I mean, already the revetment goes all the way, I mean, this is the water, this is the jetty going this way, and it already goes to the back of the lot, but you're talking about adding,
around the backside.
doing an L. around
Somewhat of an L.
the side
Somewhat of an L.
opposite the
Wrapped L.
beach.
Yeah, if it's, so if here's the jetty and here's the beach,
You're talking
Change
about
the
turning
time.
the corner there.
talking about the corner back on the backside.
Oh, yeah, right.
And what,
And there's.
You used to hang out there now and then?
The town's been putting sand back here.
Oh, yeah,
More than one bluefish, though.
Oh, yeah.
a lot of it.
Oh, yeah.
what will that do, Amy? Because
So it's sand they like, that comes off the beach when they clean the beach?
No, it's not,
and-
it's more bank sand. It has a little bit of grit to it. We used to put our beach rakings there, but there was a lot of public outcry about the smell because it was all mixed with codium and whatnot there. And but it is primarily, when we put sand there, it is screened bank sand. It's not beach sand, because that would just roll right off. It has to have
I
something
see.
with a little bit of texture to it. But in
I-
turn, that's.
and that's what's causing, because I mean, I've walked from Pleasant Street for
Yeah.
over 20 years from that way, and how the beach is extended into the river, and that's what's causing that?
Yeah, it's called scour. And
Right.
when in the river, river wants to move, and it can't move the way it wants to move. But what happens is there's always backside erosion. But this revetment in particular, revetment, jetty, whatever, where it ends on the landward side, it's a very sharp 90-degree angle that it cuts in, which causes worse erosion on the backside. The proposal we had a couple years ago was a very gentle taper to it, which you'll still get erosion, but it won't be as severe. And we can protect the town's interest in having that, that turnaround be viable, but we can also, maybe you do nourishment, because it should erode. There should be nourishment, but maybe once a year, a minor amount of sand going in there, not 3-4 times a year that we have to dump sand there.
Really?
Especially in the wintertime. In the wintertime, that gets hammered. So, I can't really ask you because you have to see it again, but I thought asking CPC for funding, because it'll cost probably about $100,000.
Yeah.
It's about to do with the rock.
Right.
So you want to submit a proposal to hit this October 15th deadline?
Yep. The Recreation Commission is supporting it. You don't necessarily have to support it because it still has to come to you for permitting. But is there any real red flags that you're seeing?
No, quite the opposite. I think it's really approaching being irresponsible that the Conservation Commission doesn't say something about the dumping of sand. I really feel that that's impactful, and everyone knows that, and everybody wants to protect that turnaround, so that's why it's happening. But I think the impacts to that river, where the river spills out, are really significant.
Yep.
And I
Agree.
think quahog habitat, mooring field, it's time to try something else. I think you led the NOI last time, right? And it was denied by DEP because it didn't meet some revetment,
It
criteria.
didn't protect a house, pre-78 house.
Right, but to me, I'm often not a big fan of revetments, but in this case,
Me either.
I think it's the only solution. If you want to protect that turnaround, and I think dumping sand is really impactful, so I think we have to look for something else to do, so I support it.
So is there any way we can reduce the dumping of sand immediately?
If you reduce the dumping of sand, the parking lot will, this winter, crumble in. So it's up to, we're trying to I'm hoping to get this passed so we can do something else.
How about some, like the bags that were permitted for Mill Point, could those bags be put there instead of sand?
They tried bags, they tried fiber rolls, anchored fiber rolls, just on the opposite side in Chatham, and they washed away in the first year.
Right, but that was a different location.
It is, right.
I would advocate trying the big bags that were used at Mill Point.
You'd have to still dig those in, though.
Yeah,
Could be potentially more, and you only have about 3 feet of room in some location between
yeah,
pavement and drop-off.
yeah. Well, let's hope,
We have to do alternatives anyway.
yeah, let's hope it's successful, because I think when we do discuss it, I think the impact will be discussed, because it's been happening for too long. And, but the resolution needs to be there. and we have to try to build a
Yeah.
case that DEP will support.
I think there can be a cooperative way we can do that. Hopefully, that we can, instead of just saying, okay, we need to stop doing that.
I mean, if it was possible to shorten the road by 100 feet and put the turnaround in.
Oh,
but-
yep,
But you can't because there's dunes and there's salt marsh and you can't expand the roadway.
the only other, the option is to, like they did at, I don't know if it was not Breakwater, the beach in Brewster, where they pulled back.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It'd be tough though, because you'd have to expand a turnaround into dune and into salt marsh. a
Don't
little bit.
necessarily need the turnaround.
That's the other issue, is sea level rise.
That turnaround
It's
doesn't,
remarkable at that site.
I mean, it's maybe a little wider toward
Yeah.
seaward, but not much.
No.
I
It's
mean,
only a
just,
little bit. Yeah.
just get rid of some of the parking
50-year window,
spaces.
the water
Yeah.
has come up so much more.
That's
It's
I'm
not
trying
that-
to like not pick fights with other, I'm trying to do the most,
Yeah.
It seems like the lesser of all the
the
evils.
lesser of all the evils, because I did bring that solution up of kind of pulling back, and we would be fighting an incredible uphill battle.
Right, and I like
Because
your,
that is the biggest moneymaker in this
I know,
town.
I like your approach, but it's really, you know, we signed on to uphold the Wetlands
I
Protection
hear
Act and the
ya.
bylaws, and at
I
that
hear ya.
location, we're not doing it, so
I hear ya.
let's make sure we can be successful with this.
I think what we're doing right now is the worst.
Yeah,
Banks should naturally erode, but we're making, it's too much,
yeah,
too much sediment getting in there. Okay,
okay.
so, and then the town gardens, we can put this on for next meeting if you want, but brought some of the commissioners over today. We have like 3 acres, so if you drive into the town gardens are in front of you, and to the left. The area on the right has been a field. We've talked about this before, people wanting to farm it. It is starting to get a little woody, the field, so this fall I'm gonna go and remove the olive that's growing. But there is somebody and probably others who are interested in farming this. I have one person who's interested in organic vegetable farming. They would put in a well, and we'd have to vet this and everything. But is the commission, it is your land, your jurisdictional area. Would you be interested in leasing that land out, the field area?
Are you saying the vacant area is 3 acres?
We have 6 acres on that. We have 6 acres there. 3 acres is used for the community gardens, which are not by any means full. It doesn't look like our land. There's like a fence there actually that
It's to the
separates
right.
the gardens from our other
Yeah.
part.
I had a plot there last year, and I don't,
It's the right, when you will
It's the
drive in,
field area, yeah.
the side to the right.
it's 3 acres, wow.
Yeah, it's about, well, the field area is probably about 2 at this point.
Yeah, I think there is maybe
There's
an acre
some-
woodland there,
Yeah.
all around the.
Right, around the
outskirts.
periphery, there's some invasives coming in, but there's a big tree in the middle that would stay. I would make sure this stayed because it's beautiful. But,
Why
Yeah.
wouldn't we support that?
I mean, I do see some issues anyway, not that they can't be resolved, but, at the moment it is kind of that pasture land, which is what you work hard to maintain at Thompson's Field.
valuable.
So there's a lot of, habitat value
Yep.
as it is. We wouldn't want someone to come in there and make a big mess and not be successful and then have, filled with knotweed and bittersweet and everything, because there's not really many invasives right now.
No.
It's really entrenched, it's one of those pastures that's just, even the cedar trees aren't popping up much,
No, it's
there's a
nice.
few.
Is the olive that I gotta take care of.
So, and then of course it does it's wetlands very close to the, to it, so that, I think if anything happened there, it should be maybe required to be like an organic, operation.
Absolutely.
And, there may be some bonding necessary as far as returning the site to its natural
That would
state
all
if it doesn't,
Go into the
'cause it
lease
was-
if you were to
there's
do it.
certainly the potential to cause some harm
Mhm.
compared to what's there, which is pretty valuable,
Mhm.
I kind of agree with,
I think I'd hold my judgment till we had a chance for a site visit, and we
Okay.
could talk about it on-site, because I don't have a great sense of
So we
it's
can
there
go back
now.
there again. A couple went, but,
today.
So,
You got
yep.
there
We went
today? Yeah,
if you drive in there, and Brad, I'm happy to go with you.
yeah. Okay. We'll
Sometime.
look for a chance.
Yeah. Happy to go with you sometime. It doesn't look like it's ours because there is like a cable type fence that separates the field area. But if you drive in front of you is a couple rows of gardens, there's more on the left. It's the area even farther to the right, and it's grassland,
Yeah.
essentially, field. So, but it keeps coming up, and people who are interested in it, person interested organically doing it. The property was acquired for, or I can't remember if it was gifted or acquired, but I know in the deed it said for conservation and/or agriculture. You don't get that very much, so.
I would want to look at the revenue generated from individual plots versus a lease. That's something else.
Yeah. We honestly, we break even on the plots. We don't try to make money off them. It's a good thing for the community. So, cause the water usage is high, so we bring in about $3,000 a year for the plots, but water costs us about $3,000 a year.
But Amy mentioned that they were considering putting a well in there if they,
Well, a
Well, one of
potential
them, a
person
potential
is
person.
interested. So when we put the new water system in 2 years ago, the option was dig a well, which, for the amount of water we needed was gonna be pretty big. And that was a fairly high cost. So while in the long term, going off town water is more expensive, at the time, it was the way the town went with it and putting it on town water. So somebody who's interested did mention putting in their own well that the town could also use for the gardens.
I would say that site should not just break even. That site should generate revenue. So you
We've
adjust-
tried in the past, but the
adjust your-
water usage has been really high lately, so. And actually, the usage, we have more plots than we do people. It used to be a waiting list, but we don't anymore, predominantly because Chatham opened up a community garden, and a lot of people from Chatham used to come to Harwich to do it, so.
I wonder if it might be possible to consolidate a larger plot of all the empty ones, which are kind of full of weeds, invasives, and
Yeah, that's on
whatnot.
the south side. Nobody wants them because they're wet.
Yeah.
Can grow right.
It's all kind of very close to wetlands
Yeah.
down there.
Do we have record of what the gallonage, the water usage was on that whole facility?
Get it, I don't have it.
I'd be curious to know how many gallons we use there over the season.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Can
What
we at least I don't really have executive session information for you. Again, I just put it on there and thinking I might. Can we do the minutes from May 16th at least?
Sure.
And the next time we have an exec session, I'll put those minutes on.
Okay, page 2, top line.
Hang on. Page 2, top line.
Greg Berman visited the site, period. He thought the solution they
Oh.
provided.
Yep.
And my other question was, do we usually put a time that the meeting is adjourned?
Did she or didn't she?
No, she did not.
Typically we don't. I did it on one set of my minutes. If you want, we can make that a practice.
That was my only question.
It just was the way I got used to doing them when I did minutes. I kind of like it. It's not a hard addition in the future.
I don't know. That's all I think, the only two things I noticed.
You're gonna miss Ernie. He was a good reviewer of minutes.
I still keep him apprised of everything, get all the information. He's still an associate.
Yep. I have no comments.
Okay. Anything else?
further comments?
No comments.
Okay.
I've got this,
I can take it if you
yeah,
want. I'll give it
yeah,
to
Mike,
Anita.
give it to me.
You don't have to come back.
Did you pass?
Yeah, I actually did do it back in May. I don't know why they don't have it.
Sorry, I don't know why, but I thought you did. You good?
Mark, Stan, you guys ready? With minutes, any comments?
No.
Okay. Good to go?
Make a motion to approve the minutes for Wednesday, May 16th.
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And I think I'll go ahead and motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.